Good morning, everyone. We will start in just a couple minutes. Good morning, everyone. I think we are going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Sunflower University. Good morning, good day, good evening, wherever you are in the world. We are happy that you are able to join us for this event today. Just trying to advance my slide, and it's not letting me. Just 1 second, everyone. Perfect. Okay, so little bit of a recap on the agenda and how the next few hours is going to go. So this morning we've got some great speakers lined up. We are at first going to be hearing about weather, markets, and also some technology that's available on planting seed. We're going to have a little break. And then we're going to come back for our second set of speakers, which is really all going to focus on pest management. So pests, whether that being diseases, insects, or weeds, those are all considered pests of sunflowers. And then at the end, hopefully we'll have a little bit of time left for some additional questions and answers. So I would encourage you all to join the conversation. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and also YouTube. Use the hashtag today, Nuseed Sunflower U. Share that you are participating in this event. We would certainly love that. So there's a lot of you that have signed up for this webinar today that have been to a Sunflower U event, but there's also a lot of you that have probably never been to Sunflower University. So you probably signed up, but you're really wondering what exactly is Sunflower U? Well, it's typically held every other year in person, really in the heart of sunflower country in the US, which is North Dakota, South Dakota, northwestern Minnesota. So we usually have 2 in-person locations, but this is our first time hosting a virtual event, which I really think is going to broaden our footprint and really expand who is able to attend this webinar today. We really view it as an event to help connect sunflower growers, sellers, and agronomists to the latest products and research available, all with the goal of helping to maximize your on-farm profits. So you've also probably wondered, why Sunflower University? Why are we doing this? You know, we're not ourselves a university, and really honestly it is because we have a passion for sunflowers. It is one of our core crops, and flat out, when our customers succeed, then everybody succeeds. Everybody in the sunflower industry succeeds. We want growers to be successful and processors to be successful because we want there to be long-term sunflower acres in our region for people to plant. So just a few general housekeeping rules. I know I saw in the chat, there's a few questions that came up. And so first of all, at the end of each speaker presentation, we should have time to answer a few questions, and that's when we are going to reserve that Q&A spot for. Now, you can submit a question at any time during any presentation. And what we would like you to do is not necessarily use that chat function, but if you move your mouse to the lower middle part of the screen, there is an area that says Q&A. And in that area is where you can submit a question. Now, when you submit the question, it won't necessarily show up to everybody. Only the panelists will be able to see it. But once we've looked at the question and we're able to get it answered, then we can post it up for everybody to see. So once again, that will be reserved. The questions will be answered as time allows at the end of every speaker, and use that Q&A spot right down there. Now, if you are a certified crop advisor and you're hoping to get some continuing education credits, that is also available today. There's 2.5 CEUs that are offered. There's 1 crop management and 1.5 pest management credit as well. Now, all you have to do is reply to the Zoom invite that you got and reply back with your name and your CCA number, and then we'll make sure that the credits get applied to your account. Or if you feel up to the challenge, you can also just send me a direct email, alison.pokrzywinski@nuseed.com. But it might just be easier to just hit reply to that Zoom invite. So who is the Nuseed team? Generally, if this was in person, we do a little round of introductions, but we're not going to do that today. So first of all, I'll start. My name is Alison Pokrzywinski. I am the product manager in North America for sunflowers. And also joining us, we have a wealth of sunflower knowledge on this call today, some of which are also panelists, so they would be able to also answer any questions that that might come up, including Daryl and Trig. Their pictures are down at the bottom part of the screen there. They are our field sales leaders and really are the ones with the boots on the ground and helping growers and sellers every day in the summer to understand their crop better. And also today on the call as a panelist is Justin Ingalls, our commercial sales lead. He is going to help me with moderating the questions. So who exactly is Nuseed? A lot of you may or may not know who exactly Nuseed is, but I just kind of wanted to give a little bit of an overview. So Nuseed started in Australia in 2006. Our parent company is Nufarm. Now we have 4 global regions, which equates to over 250 global employees, 11 global locations. We have global R&D programs all over the world, 2 innovation centers, and sales in over 30 countries. And all that equates to us focusing on 4 core crops: carinata, canola, sorghum, and of course, sunflowers. Now, with sunflowers, and actually all of our crops, we have the motto, value beyond yield. So we really view that in our sunflowers as being able to provide excellent seed, service, and new opportunities for farm customers. So for example, Sunflower U, we're really hoping to go beyond yield, not just giving people a product that will and should yield well on the farm, but also being able to provide value behind that. And also new sustainable plant-based solutions for end-use customers, such as our omega-3 canola products. Now, if you think back to that global picture with all those different locations, there's 2 that I really want to highlight, and that's really the heart of sunflowers in North America. So the first one being our innovation center and molecular lab that we have in West Sacramento, California. So this is a brand new lab and facility that just opened a year ago, and it is one place for us to house everything: our molecular lab, our seed production crew, our quality staff, and HR as well. Now, seed production, Northern California and kind of along that western coast. Why exactly do we do it there? And quite frankly, it's because the weather is, well, it's kind of what I would consider perfect weather for growing sunflower seed. So we want our sunflower seed to have the highest quality, and having it in an environment where there's very low disease is what makes that optimal. Now, on the flip side, when we have our R&D and we're creating our hybrid seed, we actually want to have a lot of disease and a lot of pressure that's happening against those sunflower plants. And that's why we have our R&D location for sunflowers at 3 different locations in the world: Serbia, Argentina, and also in Breckenridge, Minnesota. And the importance of that is really so it's underneath those disease stresses, wind stresses. We often get very strong winds going through the northern plains, and it's important that our hybrids are tested against all of that. And then we also have 6 additional offsite locations. So really all this equates to over 9,000 rows, and our breeding program separates about half into oilseed, 40% confection, and then 10% con oil. And a con oil is simply just a cross between an oilseed and a confection. And really what you get is kind of a seed size that's in between the two, meant for the dehulling market. So this is just a snapshot overview of our 6 offsite locations that we have. So as I had mentioned before, 80% of the sunflower acres are within North Dakota, South Dakota, and northwestern Minnesota. So that's why it's important that our offsite internal locations are within the heart of this sunflower region. For independent testing, we also work with all of the universities that offer this. For sunflowers, this includes North Dakota State, South Dakota State, Texas A&M, Colorado State, just to name a few. And the other thing that I wanted to point out was on strip trials. So because strip trials are so different than what you would say your normal corn or soybeans, as there are multiple classes of sunflowers. So you're dealing with your oilseeds, also your con oils and your confections. So sometimes it can be difficult, even with different herbicide classes, to have strip trials. We have really a product for every market out there. So within oilseed crush, you have Ohio Lake and Knudson. Within that oilseed category, you also have bird food. And then you have your confections and your con oils. And within confections, we have confections that are raised for the domestic market that are usually a little bit smaller. And then for the export market, where in a lot of other places in the world, they really want their confection seed a lot longer than we would typically see here in the United States. And then also within all of that, we have all 3 of the herbicide systems: Clearfield, Clearfield Plus, and also Express Sun. So when you maybe first look at a sunflower lineup, it maybe seems a little overwhelming, but when you really break it down to exactly what you're looking for, you can typically narrow things down and find something that's exactly what you're looking for. Now, I'm sure you guys are tired of hearing about me and Nuseed, and you didn't necessarily come here to hear about all of this. You came here to learn the latest and greatest in sunflowers and to hear from the experts. But there is one last thing that I wanted to share that is industry related that I thought should be shared. So if you currently receive the Sunflower magazine that's put out by the National Sunflower Association, there is a bird damage survey that they are going to be sending out. Now, this is for past and present sunflower producers in the United States. So if you fall into that category, you will probably be seeing either in your email through the NSA or via mail this bird damage survey. And I would encourage you either here today through this or when you get it in the mail to please fill it out, because it is through that information that people can really figure out where the research needs to be spent for bird damage. So the link is down below, and also if you're able to with your phone, you could also scan the QR code, and that will bring you right to that bird damage survey. So with that, I would like to thank everyone for being on the call today. And we are going to get things kicked off with Daryl Ritchison. Daryl is the director of the North Dakota Agricultural Weather Network, commonly known as NDON, at North Dakota State University. He spends his time on research, public outreach and development, and enhancement of tools for NDON, which is a network of 162 weather stations located throughout North Dakota, eastern Montana, and Minnesota. Previous to his current position, he worked for 25 years as a meteorologist at various Midwestern television and radio stations. And I know, Daryl, when you were doing that, I always enjoyed seeing you on the news. But happy that you are still able to provide all of us in the Northern Plains region value. So with that, the floor is yours, and thank you for joining us at our first virtual Sunflower U.
Well, it's really good to hear. I will just verify that everyone is seeing my screen with my name and who I am on there before I start. Everyone seeing that correctly? I will take that as a yes. Anyway, I am the director of NDON right now. I work through NDSU. I will say nothing, of course, that I say in this talk necessarily reflects the views of my employer, which is North Dakota State University. North Dakota State University cannot be held liable for any forecasting or anything presented in this presentation. My long-term forecasts are meant for analysis and for chat, and I do expect no one necessarily to change their crop rotations based on my forecast going forward. As we all know, forecasting tomorrow can be tough. Forecasting 6 to 9 months gets a little tougher than that even. So just wanted to put those caveats into this before I actually begin. Again, I am the director of NDON. NDON is the North Dakota Agricultural Weather Network, and we go far beyond North Dakota. We have stations in Minnesota, and we have stations in Montana as well. If you go to our homepage, and one of the easiest ways to get there is just go to ndon.org. That'll take you to the current weather. Just click on the top on our logo and it will take you to our homepage. And these are the stations that you will see on our homepage. These are the stations that we're currently furnishing computer guidance for. All we do for sunflowers at the moment is growing degree days, but we're hoping to expand that into perhaps some of the fungal diseases that impact sunflowers in the near future, in the coming years. But these are the stations that you can get computer guidance on a number of croppings besides just growing degree days. Sometimes I kiddingly say the North Dakota Agricultural Weather Network should be the North Dakota Fungus Weather Network, because we provide a lot of tools for a number of fungal diseases for a number of crops in the area. Although our homepage suggests that we only have 131 pages, I actually have 161. There are 30 missing stations, and we've added quite a few stations in the fall of 2019 and during the course of 2020. I only have one computer programmer, so in turn, we're behind in getting all these stations on board, but I would suspect sometime, probably hopefully in March, if you go to our homepage, we'll have another 20 or maybe as many as 30 more weather stations added to the list. This is just a quick view of where all of our stations currently are located in the area. And again, we will be getting many of these added onto our main website. In the short term, if you want to find data from our website that really are not available on our website, I should say, this is where you should go. And no www on this, just if you type in cloud.ndon.org, it will take you to this page. And you will notice down here in the bottom of the page, there are other states and other things available. That's just the North Dakota sites. on the very top. And if you click on one of these links, that you would get the current data for sites that are not on our website, but also that are on our website. And what you would get is something like this. It'll give you the current data. This page updates every 5 minutes, 24/7, 365. You'll notice that there's little calendar icons on some of the things. You can click on certain dates if you're curious what had happened in the past. We do not, again, offer some of our computer guidance on this, but at least you can look at the weather data as we work on getting the rest of those pages installed. This is a site, for instance, that actually has a camera on it. And we actually have another page that you can go to and just look at the pictures. This is a picture from back in December from our Clyde station that's not currently on our website. And we also furnish on all of our stations, both online currently or just in our cloud service, soil moisture data. I do want to point out that this blue line right here is soil moisture at this particular site, which was in Clyde, North Dakota. And you'll notice that it just dipped down rapidly, almost in a single day. That is when the ground froze at this level. This is actually 2 inches in depth. So this time of year, if you go to our soil moisture page and curious, wow, it's been dry lately, you have to remember soil moisture is water. There is no water when the ground is frozen. It's technically ice instead of liquid water, and this can only measure liquid water. But what we have done on our cloud service, again, sites that are available on our website or not, this tool, and this is really giving you soil saturation because every soil type has a little bit different level of the amount of moisture it can hold. And so we've done this throughout all of our sites in North Dakota. From memory, we have approximately 45 stations that have soil moisture data available. I have a soil physicist that works for me, and we've been trying to simplify what the soil moisture content actually is. Because on the previous page here, you'll notice this deals with this VWC, which is volumetric water content. What volume of the soil is water? Because of course you have the soil per se in down there, but you have air and you have water in there. So to simplify things, we try to get you what % of saturation that soil is, which I think is a little bit more easily understood by more people. This is my segue into my talk. This was sunflower growing degree days 2020 versus 2019. Because we never really had an extremely hot period in 2020, a lot of people didn't realize that 2020 is really, especially in the Midwest, North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, in many ways, about as warm as the summer gets. And the nice thing, because we didn't have too many days with extreme heat, we were just consistently 2 or 3 degrees above average every day, which in turn gave us more growing degree day units. And so this is, you'll notice, even though this season was shortened by an early frost, I put September 10th down on this because either on that September 8th, 9th, or 10th, most areas not only had a frost, they had a hard freeze, one of the earliest ones on record. But even with that, if you planted your sunflowers in the very end of May, you notice even by that freeze date, how many more growing degree days we've had the 2020 than we did in 2019. I really start this whole weather segment off by mentioning this is because 2021, just from a statistical point of view, you don't really even need to be a meteorologist. It would be hard to have a summer, the core of summer last year, June, July, and August, warmer than we had this past year. So I would expect that this upcoming year, we're going to have fewer growing degree days than we had last year. But because we had this early freeze again, we may end up with just as many growing degree days because the season is very likely going to be longer next year than it was this previous year. So I just want to quickly review 2020. And I'm going to start off, and I'm just going to use Fargo, North Dakota. One of the reasons is we just have long-term records in Fargo. And because this is a biannual event, of course, most of you did not hear me give my 2020 forecast a year ago. I had forecasted 2020 in most areas to be drier than average, which was the case. But again, it wasn't drier than average for everyone. Most of the area certainly was. And one of the tools I use really is when you understand weather a little bit and patterns, you notice all these years that we had this heavy rain, and 2019 was very wet, especially in the autumn, is that the following year, in almost all cases, you had a dramatic shift. The Midwest of the United States is a continental climate. We have extremes. Average means very little. For instance, this whole graph is taking this line right here, the center point on this graph is the long-term average. I took all the rainfall from 1881 to 2020 and just average that out. And then what years were above and below average. And you notice most of the lines on here are long. That means they were noticeably away from that average. Again, Northern Plains, the upper Midwest, we live in a land of extremes. And so this past year, I did not fill this out for 2020 yet, but Fargo, for instance, finished about 3 inches below average based on the long-term average over the entire region. So that is a point I really am trying to emphasize, is that 2021, no matter where you are in the world, 2021 is the beginning of a new average cycle. The average that you see if you watch television, if you just read, no matter where you get your weather, a lot of times they will tell you, well, you're 10 degrees above average or below average, you're 3 inches above average precipitation, or 75 millimeters above average, saying about approximately the same thing. And if you're in an area that uses the metric system, is that these averages are based on the last 30 years of whole decades. And a whole decade is from 1 to 0. So the 20 teens technically ended on December 31st, just about a month ago. And so because that was the end of a whole decade, all the new averages from around the world, based on NOAA, if you're in the United States, the World Meteorological Organization, if you're elsewhere, will change. Now, they're not changing instantly because it all has to be computed. But as we go into this year, perhaps especially May into June, these new averages will come out. So what this is just a representation of Fargo, but this is very true for almost everywhere in the upper Midwest. If you're watching in North, South Dakota, or Minnesota in particular, this is very true. These are the 30-year averages. And you notice that the 30-year average, the first one we had in Fargo was back in 1910, because the record started in 1881. And notice how this average dipped and then has gone up. And so the average right now in Fargo, these are all those 30-year averages through time. And you notice the old average right here in Fargo was 22.9. We'll just round that up to 23 inches a year. The new average is a whole inch higher, is now about 24 inches. I emphasize this because notice what the averages used to be, maybe when you were younger, or perhaps when your grandfather was farming, or your father even. Notice how the averages in many areas, not only in Fargo, but many areas, are anywhere from 3 to 5 inches greater than they were. Why? Because most people, if you're in the upper Midwest, call it, wow, you know, we've been in a wet cycle. That word just makes, it's like when someone takes their fingernails on a chalkboard to me. It's really a wet phase within the overall climate pattern of where we live in the upper Midwest, again, if you're in that area. So the thing is, in 2021, look at what the new average is. This is a really bold statement to make, but I would not be surprised at all if 7 or 8 of the next 10 years, so that would really take over the entire 2021s, the whole 2020s rather, decade that we're in now, will be below average. Why? Because that average has been skewed upwards. Notice 1910, 110 years ago, that was the highest 30-year average Fargo's ever had. And truth be told, much of the Midwest. What if in 1911, I said, that's going to be the highest average of the 20th century? People would probably have laughed at me. And some of you are probably laughing at me saying what I just said, but this possibly could be the highest average of this entire century. My point here is this. Just because you're below average in rainfall does not necessarily mean A, you're in a drought, or B, it's bad, because again, these averages are skewed because of our wet cycle that most people call it. Again, I prefer wet phase, but the wet phase is likely on the process of ending if we look at things from a historical perspective. So I just want to mention that average is different. This is up in Langdon, North Dakota, for instance, and the solid line here is just the changes in the average over time. And again, that's another location that's completely different average-wise than it used to be. Now, 2020 was a very interesting year weather-wise. Again, I had forecasted 2020 to be dry in most areas a year ago. And back in June, this is Bismarck, North Dakota. Back in June, you'll notice if you look at this chart down here, The red line is not only 2020, but it's also the driest on record. Believe it or not, on June 26th of this year, Bismarck, North Dakota was having their driest year on record, and Bismarck's records go back into the 1870s. Just absolutely remarkable. This was the Dust Bowl type dryness from the 1930s that at least Bismarck was experiencing way back in June. So I was getting a lot of phone calls at that time. Of course, people going, wow, Daryl, good forecast for this year. It's really, really dry. Well, I'll be honest. At this point, I said, you know, the next few weeks look wet. And so hopefully we'll get some rain and our crops will grow really well. Fargo at that same time also was not the driest on record, but one of the driest on record. And then, of course, what happened was in July, and this is Fargo again, you'll notice in July how quickly the precipitation, and really last year's rainfall is the green line in here, but notice in the middle of the summer, especially July into early August, was quite wet. Not only in Fargo, but up in Grand Forks, same thing. Look at this big peak that occurred. Matter of fact, Grand Forks finished the year below average, but actually had above average rainfall going forward, especially during the months of July and August last year. In fact, some parts were even too wet last year. But the key here is that most areas did end up finishing the year below average, although the summer was pretty beneficial. And Bismarck, for example, ended up with their third driest year since 1875. I mean, they were, this was 1934, 1936, 1988 dryness, just phenomenal dry year. The good thing is most areas were not quite this dry, just the thunderstorms happened to miss the airport in Bismarck, where it was the third driest on record. And up in Williston, really the same story, also the third driest. Well, again, not everyone was quite that dry, but 2020 was a very dry year. The thing is about 2020, especially in central and western, both North and South Dakota, in many ways was a lot of soil moisture was present because of the extremely wet autumn of 2019. And in turn, that moisture is being used by a lot of crops through this dry year, and yields and things were not all that bad outside of the fact, of course, we had the early freeze last year. The thing is, going into 2021, most of that soil is no longer, soil moisture is no longer available. So here's just a quick look, especially if you're close to North Dakota. Here was the growing season precipitation. You notice there's a couple of pockets that were above average, but all the yellows and oranges, those were all the areas that finished the growing season, May through September, below average. But if we look at just the core of the summer, June, July, and August, you know, there were pockets of wet. And all of these pockets of wet were somewhat unique in the fact that they were really occurred because of 1 or 2 days. This areas in western North Dakota above average, that was 1 day. One thunderstorm dropped 3 to 5 inches of rain. Southeastern North Dakota, this was because of 2 days, 2 thunderstorm complexes. And up in northwestern Minnesota, which was the wettest, that really in many ways occurred because of 3 thunderstorm complexes that dropped quite a bit of rain. But you notice more areas than not did finish last year below average. Now, temperature wise, if you look May through September, most of you that are in the United States listening to this recall that, wow, it was cold last year in May, the first 15 days. But once we got to about May 15th until that first freeze in early September, it was exceptionally warm. So these numbers are skewed back a little bit, but here's the actual temperatures in the summertime, June, July, and August. And you notice most areas were 2-3 degrees above average. And that's about as much as above or below average you usually get in a season. So in other words, many areas finished last year, the summer, which is by definition, June, July, and August, finished, you know, in the top 10 warmest summers on record. Why, in fact, I would suspect that next year will probably be a little bit cooler than it was this year. So this was the NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's zones. You'll notice North, South Dakota, and Minnesota all divided in approximately 9 climatic zones. You look at the bottom of the screen, you know, most areas finished a good solid, you know, 1/2 to 2 degrees above average during that time frame. And then precipitation wise, May through September by NOAA statistics, and I'll be honest, NOAA doesn't necessarily use NDON stations on this. So I think we give a clearer picture of this, but you notice how really dry it was throughout much of the upper Midwest by NOAA statistics, which fit in many ways what I was thinking that was going to happen for last year. So that's a review of 2020, 2021 and beyond. And really, Daryl, beyond 2021? Well, I'm going to give you a couple of examples. One of the native species of trees in the upper Midwest and the northern plains are bur oak. And most of the Great Plains before Europeans settled the areas, the only place that there was really trees were in the river bottoms. Well, bur oak is unique. You know, there's elms, there's some maples, there's other tree species that are native to the area. But bur oak, when they flood in the spring, because, you know, imagine you're a tree in March, it starts to get warm, you start to awaken from hibernation. What happens so often in April in these parts? Yeah, the river floods. Most of the time, not very bad, but it'll flood, you know, a little bit where all the trees are growing along the river. Bur oak actually leaves a little marker when that happens. So you can start to index how often that occurs. And so in using that methodology, you can kind of equate that back to when there were dry years, when there were wet years. And you notice the 1930s Dust Bowl shows up very well. The 1860s into the early 1870s, from what little records we have, that decade looked to have been about as dry as the 1930s. The big difference was we had plowed up all the soil, caused our own catastrophe. Back in, all the native prairie species were used to droughts and handled that pretty well. So there's a little bit of a difference there, but this kind of gives us a picture historically of when we had wet periods, when we had dry periods. And you notice oftentimes it's not perfect, but historically, these wet phases in the climate oftentimes lasted around 20, 25 years on average. The current wet phase that we've been in, and not every year has been wet, granted, has been about 25 years, which is kind of a clue from a historical perspective of that we might actually be moving out of this wet phase and moving into perhaps what was more common in the 20th century between wet phases. This is a really a statistical tool, something I just want to show you. This is the Great Lakes, and they throw in Lake St. Clair by Detroit in here, and they combine Lakes Huron and Michigan here because they're kind of at the same level. But I want to just show you this, and again, this is just something to think about. The Great Lakes generally had a peak in the late 1920s. What occurred afterwards? Exactly. Here's the next peak. In the 1950s. What occurred afterwards? Well, if you're in South Dakota, there's some pretty good drought years in the 1950s. North Dakota, yes, but not as severe as they were off to our south. But most of the central and southern plains had some horrific droughts after this. Here was the next high phase in many ways. This would be the early 1980s. What did the mid to late 80s into the early 1990s generally have? Dry conditions, many drought years during that period. Well, guess what? In 2018, 2019, 2020 now, the Great Lakes again have reached that same peak. If you look at history to at least rhyme, I'm not there. Tom Sawyer, Samuel Clemens, has a lot of famous quotes. One of his is that history does not repeat itself, but it does rhyme. I use that in weather. Weather doesn't repeat itself, but weather does rhyme. Look at the rhyming. What would come after this Great Lakes peak that we're in right now? Probably a dry cycle. So to forecast 6 to 9 months, if you've never heard me speak before, I always rely on the oceans as my number one source. And I'm going to run this loop. These are, keyword here, folks, anomalies. What are you above or below average? For instance, you notice some of the North Pacific is above average. If you fall off a boat, you still have 25 minutes to live if someone doesn't rescue you. It is bitterly cold, 42-degree water, and you can't survive in that. Think Titanic movie, okay? The equator here, probably the most obvious thing on this entire map right now is over the equator. And you notice it's all this blue. That is colder than average water. It's still warm, it's the equator, but it's colder than average. This, you may have heard, is La Nina that is currently in place in the Pacific Ocean. Couple of things to look at here is number one, how the Pacific Ocean has been cooling per anomalies. You know, it always cools this time of year because it's the Northern Hemisphere's winter, but it's cooling per anomalies in that area. and what's happening currently in the equatorial Pacific Ocean. So these are the actual sea surface temperatures. I just like to show this to show you that, yeah, it's warmer than average, but it's still bitterly cold in the North Pacific Ocean and in the North Atlantic, for instance. But a La Nina is the equatorial Pacific, a 0.5 degree Celsius. If you're a Fahrenheit user, think of it as 1 degree colder than average. And probably more known, El Ninos are when that equatorial Pacific is a 0.5 degree Celsius warmer than average. And the thing is, what I don't have on here is for 3 months or longer. So it's over a 3-month or a seasonal basis. Here's some examples of La Ninas and El Ninos. This is a La Nina from just a few years ago here. And here was an El Nino back in 1982, 1983, when if you're 50 or 45, 50 years of age or older, was probably the first time in your life you ever heard the term El Nino mentioned in the media or the press, although it was known in meteorological circles at that time because of what happened that year globally in 82, 83. It had some wide range problems. Why is this important? Where is most of the surface area of the planet Earth? Near the equator. We're round. So this area here is much more aerial than, you know, everything above and below down here, because again, we're a ball. And so not only is that where most of the surface area is on the planet Earth, it is also where the water is. And if you've ever boiled water, which I think every single person does, it takes a lot of energy to warm up water. It takes a lot of energy to cool it down. So when this large area of the planet is above or below average, it usually has global repercussions. Oftentimes with El Ninos, the whole globe warms up a little bit, and during La Ninas, they cool down a little bit. You might not be noticeable in a given area, but on a global scale, it does. And when you warm or cool things down, it has it increases or decreases the amount of atmospheric moisture in the atmosphere as well, because this is going to release more moisture, say more humidity, if you want to use that term, than this situation right here. So then add the two together, it does have global repercussions. And again, these are the triangles approximately where El Nino and La Ninas are actually measured from. And within that area, there's zones. And oddly, certain zones where it's warmer, cooler than average equates to different weather patterns. Oftentimes, especially the media, which tries to overly simplify things and oftentimes in turn doesn't give you the complete information. Oh, there's a La Nina, this is going to happen. X equals Y. X does not equal Y in weather. There's always more complex than that. It might be TUVWX equals Y. I mean, there's several reasons why everything happens. La Nina or El Nino might be the biggest factor, but it's not the only factor. And so you do have to look at other things, especially in the United States, in some degree in South America as well, although it works more in South America and the United States. La Nina equals drought. That just doesn't work that way all the time. There's usually other things in play. What this is computer guidance. And this is where we're at right now. Where are we going in the future? This line right here, you know, above it, this is El Nino territory up here, and La Nina is down here. So we're in a La Nina right now. Notice that most of the global forecasting models for the ocean have us going back into neutral territory very late in the year. Notice these numbers down here. That's August, September, October. So the reality is most of the, you know, once we get into the spring season in the Northern Hemisphere, we're generally still going to have La Nina conditions. And the other thing is, again, X doesn't equal Y, but the conditions that are out there tend to linger beyond the oceans because patterns get going. No matter where you are in the world, you probably, you know, generally get, especially if you're in the mid latitudes, you know, this happens for 2 or 3 weeks. This happens for 2 or 3 weeks. You go back and forth through different types of patterns and, you know, oscillations in many cases through time. So this is the Oceanic Nino Index. Again, up, these are all the famous El Ninos. These are all the famous La Ninas down here. And so what I try to do is I go back in time and go, what were the weather conditions under circumstances that are similar to today? And so you go back and go, wow, this is almost, it looks very similar to what's happening right now. What was the weather then? And it doesn't work all the time, but it works better than a coin flip on these long range forecasting going forward. And so that's what I try to do. So you try to look at things in the past that are similar to today, and then I call those are referenced as analogs. And so this, for instance, a lot of people have equated this year to be very similar to 16 and 17. Is it? Because again, this says 2020, 2016, but it's the following growing season. So 16, that equated to the 17 growing season. 2020 is going to equate to what we don't know what's going to happen going forward. And you notice, for instance, these 2 years do not match. They do not match on this level. The weather may end up being the same, but again, for different reasons. And I always like to point that out. So you'll notice these are just letters of the alphabet that going, whoa, that's just, what would that be? An alphabet soup in many ways. But you'll notice they all end with an O, except for one. And that O stands for oscillations. This is probably the most important. And this one, what is this? This is the Pacific Decadal Oscillation. The other one I circled is the Atlantic Multi-Decadal Oscillation. Remember the key word in both of those? Decade is mentioned in it. These are oscillations in the oceans that can last over a decade, sometimes 15, 20, 25 years. And then you'll notice that, whoa, we've kind of been wet for 20 years, then we're dry for 20 years, and then we're wet for 20 years. Again, not one thing equates to something else exactly in weather, but overall patterns tend to fluctuate through time and through decadal periods. So to finish up, I just always like giving a background on last year, where we're going, some of the tools I use to go into what I think is going to happen in the next growing season. So if you're familiar with the movie Back to the Future, this is a DeLorean. So I always joke with folks, I'm going to take my DeLorean into October of this year, bring it back, and let you know what the weather is going to be this year. But this is my 2021 summer analog package. And again, this is really 4 or 5 years in the past blended together. And you notice the overall blending in the Great Plains is for all from the southern Great Plains to the northern Great Plains, even into Canada, is for above average. But always the key is down here. This actually would be a little bit above average, but cooler than 2020. But as I already pointed out, we had an early freeze in many parts of northwestern Minnesota, North and South Dakota in the United States. So in turn, we may end up with the exact same growing degree days because we'll get September that most of us really didn't get this year because things froze up. Most, not in all areas going forward. So I think it might be a bit cooler this next year than last year, not necessarily below average though. And then my precipitation analogs, as you notice, most of the upper Midwest, drier than average, then off in the southern plains, near or maybe a little bit above average. And truth be told, this would be somewhat similar to what the pattern is we have right now over this last winter, over the last 3 or 4 months. Most of the storms have gone off to the south of us, and we've gotten, of course, very, very little moisture during that time period. So again, that's my summer analogs, both for precipitation as well as for temperatures. This is a reminder, this is just for the NDON stations, but these were the last 2 dry years. This is 2012, which was dry really over much of the United States, of course, but you notice there were still pockets that did really well. This is 2017. Again, there are pockets that do well. We get our rain from thunderstorms. One thunderstorm can change your entire summer, as we all know. Your neighbor a couple miles away, very well, he got an inch of rain last night. You got 400 or 500. His pounds, per acre in sunflowers was, 22% higher than yours, just to throw a number out there, because he got that one rain and you didn't. That almost happens every single summer in certain areas. But it's just a reminder that temperature wise, I say everyone's going to be a little bit above average. That usually everyone is a little bit above average. But as we all know with rainfall, it varies quite a bit from spot to spot, and you try to get the overall trend for an area. So to sum up, there are clearly, I've given you some of them very quickly, didn't go into too much detail, but there are reasons to think that there'd be more dry areas than wet areas in 2021. We have to wait until September to find out if that's actually true. I think we're going into a period of colder than average temperatures in the upper Midwest. We've been phenomenally warm now really since late October. We had a cold period with snow in October, but late October, through now, almost the end of January, we've been way above average. I think that's going to transition into a colder than average March into April. And then 2021, likely a bit cooler, maybe by a full degree cooler than last year, which would mean, a couple hundred growing degree days potentially. But again, if the growing season extends into late September, which is the odds favor, then we would balance that out because of our early freeze last year. And then I always like to remind people of these decadal changes coming to that long-term precipitation mean. We might go into a period because our average now is so high that if we have 5 or 6 years of historically average temperatures, historically average precip, well, that might be 2 or 3 inches below what you've gotten in a lot of years recently, which is a difference, and it's going to make a difference. But from a historical perspective, it's not necessarily dry, but it's going to really probably be thought of as dry. So anyway, I left us some time for some questions, and I'd be very, very happy to answer anyone that anybody has.
Daryl, good morning. Good information. A couple questions have come in that I'd like you to comment on and share for the entire group. But as you kicked off your presentation, you talked about where some of this information can be accessed. You want to make a comment and just some clarification on where some of the data you shared? Is it out on the NDON site? Just
a lot of what I shared was from NDON. And if one way, if you just go to ndon.org, this works on most computers, it would take you to our current data in a table. But if you click in the upper left-hand corner to our logo, it would actually take you to our homepage, for instance. And if you want, if you can always go, again, don't put a www in front of this stuff, folks. But if you go to cloud.ndon.org, it'll take you to that other site that I want, that will give you information on all of our sites, plus the 31 sites that we currently have on our main website. And if you need more information about any of this, I cannot emphasize enough, I don't care where you are in the world, you can email me right there, and I will send you what you would like to get as well. And there's other ways in South Dakota, Minnesota, for instance, where you can get this data if you're not served by NDON. South Dakota has a Mesonet, for instance. I could give you that link for you if you're unaware of it. And I can give you some links to NOAA's data if you would like it from there too. So don't be afraid to email me.
Oh, great. What a resource you are for all of us. Maybe one more or two more questions. What happened to the fall forecast for the upper Midwest being colder and wetter than normal?
Well, that's always difficult because my fall forecast was drier and warmer than average. Truth be told, we finished right at average because we had that cold stretch both in October and we had a cold stretch in September. So overall, the autumn finished pretty close to normal. I missed that one by a little bit, but the drier part was in my forecast. Even this winter, most of the winter forecasts were colder than average and more snow than average. I said I don't necessarily disagree with the colder, although I think we're going to be close to average on that colder, but the wetter, I also had, I thought this winter was going to be pretty dry. Clearly, even my forecast for the winter has been off. It's been, my goodness, we're 10, 12 degrees above average. And even though I think we're trending maybe for the next 60 or 90 days to be closer to average or a little bit below, we're never going to make, probably be cold enough to ever turn this winter into anything but a mild one. But I also always remind people, and I haven't in this talk yet, La Nina, which we're currently in, is not as good of a statistical tool for forecasting as El Nino. You have to look at it. Every interview I did about this winter, when I said, I think we'll finish below average for snowfall, but maybe I'll give you the cold, maybe we'll finish like degree or 2 below average, which is not going to happen clearly. I said, you have to remember that the warmest winter on record in North Dakota occurred during a La Nina. And that was in 11-12, just about a decade ago. And so, these long range forecasts don't work out perfectly. But again, it's always difficult for me to answer. I can explain why I was wrong. I can't necessarily explain why someone else was wrong. Are there any other questions?
Justin, you're
We've
on
got
mute.
one more if we've got time. And this is asking maybe to compare maybe 2012 and 2013 to this past year. Let's do maybe a comparison with that.
That's really a good question. I'll be honest, that is probably the most asked question of me this winter, because I just hinted to it. When was really the last La Nina that was stronger? We've had a couple of La Ninas in the 20 teens, but they were tended to be more weak. The last really strong La Nina we had was back in the 10, 11, and 11 and 12 years. It really lasted for a couple of years. And although 2011 was wet in the first half of the year, and there was flooding in much of the Midwest, it really dried off in a hurry. And then that lasted through the 2011-12 winter. And then 2012, of course, not only was a drought, it was very widespread drought. It impacted yields across most states, most of the core growing areas of the United States. And so a lot of people have asked me, well, we're going to experience another 2012. And I go, yeah, we might. You know, the reality is nobody knows the future, including me. You know, I just forecast it for a living. There are differences out there. There's differences, especially in the Pacific Ocean, that are noticeably different than what happened in 2011-12. There's similarities, and we're experiencing some of those similarities right now. As you already know, I had 2021 in my forecast. It just looks dry to me more than wet with what I'm seeing right now. But would it be a repeat of 2012? Probably not. I personally see the southern parts of the upper Midwest, some of the core corn growing areas, probably not succumbing to 2012. You know, Iowa was pretty dry this past year. I completely understand why people are looking at that. But again, no 2 years repeat itself. They rhyme, but they don't repeat itself. I'm more concerned about the northern growing areas for 2021 being drier than the southern parts of the core, you know, soybean corn belts, traditionally areas. 2021, and whereas 2012 it impacted everyone else. But I'll be honest, if we have another widespread drought in 2012 beyond where I see it right now, I would not be surprised. I know that really wasn't an answer because it's the future, but there are some differences there, and I just don't right at the moment think it's going to repeat directly.
No, that's good. Maybe we've got time for one more, and this is really looking ahead as well into the future. And you talked about it. You gave some reasons why you believe 2021 is going to be drier than wet. And I know the growers and the producers on this call are looking at profitability and growing sunflowers. So maybe a few more comments if you want to build on 2021 and what the trends and what your data is telling you, what 2021 may look like from your opinion.
There's a couple things I think you need to mention about 2021. Is 2019 was phenomenally wet. In climatological circles, they use this phrase black swan events, where they called black swan events because they are so much different than anything else in the record book. For instance, what happened in 1936 with the heat wave that impacted the central part of the United States, there's nothing that even comes close to that. It'd be a black swan event. I don't like the term black swan event because there is a thing called there is an actual swan that's black. I like using white bison events because they're much more rare, and it kind of fits the Great Plains no matter what state you're in. And well, sadly, some of you, I know many of you are NDSU people, but it fits my university pretty well because that's our logo, of course, too. But 2019, that fall would fit as a white bison event. It was probably the wettest fall in the upper Midwest since 1825. For instance, well, we don't have good records back that far, but I mention that is because when you look at the USDA agricultural statistics about soil moisture, my data from my stations did not necessarily equate with that. I mean, if you're west of the Missouri River, yeah, the subsoil is dry all the way down to about 20 inches. If you're in eastern North Dakota, it's really only dry in the top few inches. Sunflowers can go down pretty deep. So if you get that seed to germinate, get a good rain at the beginning of the year, well, if it's going to be drier than average, you're going to get more sunshine. And of course, crops grow because of the sun. That's the most important. Water is number 2, but sun is number 1, in my estimation, is that the areas that have the subsoil moisture might not be quite as damaged as the others. And there's quite a bit of moisture still from 2019 in many parts of the region, going back to the fall of 2019. So just because you're drier than average might just equate to your near average from the overall historical records. You know, if you go back the last 100-year average, you might be near that. But it goes back to, again, because of this wet cycle, when you get used to this extra 3 or 4 or 5 inches of rain every year, well, you start planting for it. And so if my forecast is right, yeah, it's not going to be perfect, but outside of, say, the far western areas that are dry down to about 24 inches, I think there's enough subsoil moisture that would still make 2021 a pretty good year. I think sunflowers, corn, sugar beets would be the 3 crops that could probably go down and get that moisture. I think it'd be a tougher year if what I am forecasting comes true, for, say, soybeans, for instance, and especially for all the grain crops, all the wheat varieties out there, for instance. So really, in many ways, as we all know, comes down to timely rains. You can be 3 inches below average, but if the rains come at just the right times, you can do pretty well as too. I'm just not one that likes to spread fear. Absolutely not. And you can still do pretty well even with below average precipitation if you think about it, because I've already seen other, say, news agencies and stuff pushing this 11-12 thing. And to me, it's just, you're pushing fear because it's not here yet. And I hate to say it, I worked in the news industry for 25 years. What sells the easiest to human beings? Fear sells more than anything else. And I just don't like selling it, and I don't like buying it from people.
Thank you. Thank you, Daryl. And I know from the sunflower community side, the fact that you guys do have growing degree days in the end-on site for sunflowers has always been really valuable for myself as well. So, well,
we're really hoping, and I know Sam Markell is probably listening because he's speaking this morning, but hopefully in the next few years, we can help sunflower growers with maybe some tools. We have a lot of tools for fungal diseases for other crops. We don't quite yet for sunflowers. And that is something, hopefully I have some monies coming in, and I have some agency groups that might be able to support NDON a little bit better coming forward. That is very promising, that hopefully we can add to our list of tools for sunflowers besides just that growing degree days.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you for the invite today. I enjoyed it.
Yes, thank you very much, Daryl. We've appreciated it. Okay, moving on. Our next speaker is Kevin Bigger. Kevin is the Sales and Marketing Manager for sugar beet and field crops with Germains. He graduated from North Dakota State University with an agronomy degree. After 3 years with AgriPro Biosciences, he joined Germains as a research agronomist. He's now been there for over 31 years. Kevin, this is your first time joining us for a Sunflower U event. So I appreciate you taking the time to be here with us today and teaching us something. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. Can you hear me?
Yes, you are great.
Okay. Well, good morning to everybody. It's great to be speaking with you here today. And I'd like to thank Nuseed for the opportunity to present some new information about sunflower pellets. I thought I'd begin by giving a little background on Germains, who we are and what we do. We are a seed technology company that was founded 150 years ago in Los Angeles, California. Today, the corporate headquarters are located in Kings Lynn, United Kingdom. We have production factories in the UK, the Netherlands, Spain, and in the US we have 2, one in Gilroy, California, which is primarily horticulture, and Fargo, North Dakota, which is sunflower and sugar beet. We have a strong research background with R&D facilities in the UK, the Netherlands, and here in the US in Gilroy, California. We deliver solutions to the seed supply chain throughout North America, Europe, Africa, the Middle East, and Mexico. We currently work with over 32 crops and deal in both conventional and organic technologies. Our core is sugar beet, sunflower, lettuce, spinach, tomato, and various other vegetable crops. But to be clear, we don't sell seed, we only sell seed technology. We have been pelleting sunflower for over 20 years, and historically we've used a sugar beet blend for our pellet. In 2016, we started doing some research and reformulation work to develop a pellet blend specifically for sunflower. And once we did that and had a final product, we rebranded that pellet as Prosun Precise. Prosun Precise is a reformulated pellet just for sunflower. This product is purely about plantability. The keys to plantability for this product are added weight and the rounder shape, allowing for more consistent, uniform self-fill and more uniform seed drop, which leads to more uniform stands as you look down the row. I'd like to, so I don't forget, I'd like to note now that this product will perform best in precision type planters. Most of the work we have done has been in the John Deere air planters. It is certainly not recommended for air seeders, plate planters, or finger planters. This is a picture of the product. Could be any color. Nuseed's is green. I apologize for not having a green pellet here today. But if you note it, you'll note the rounder, fuller pellet that has more weight. And also should probably flag up here that it'll come as a sized product and a size spec. Most of them will come as size 3 or size 2. And whatever it says on the bag, if it says Prosun size 3, use the same plate you would for a size 3 raw product. Okay, following the development of our new pellet blend, we felt it was prudent to do some due diligence with field trials. Our goals were to establish how Prosun compared to raw at emergence. We wanted to measure plantability by recording skips and doubles. And lastly, to see if improved stand uniformity would lead to yield improvements. So with such diverse goals, we needed to run 2 separate trials, one set to only measure emergence and another set to capture all the other measurements. For the emergence measurements, we selected 2 locations, NDSU Research Extension Centers at Carrington and Minot. The trials were conducted over 2 years for a total of 4 treatments. Those years were 2017 and 2018, 2017 and 2018. Treatments were paired in a randomized complete block design using 6 replication. 4 lots were included with each trial for a total of 16 comparisons over the 2 years. All seed for each comparison originated from the same seed lot. Seeds were counted by the cooperator to a specific known number and planted through a cone planter, assuring a fair and equal evaluation between the seed types. So here we have, first of all, these emergence or these values are expressed in percentages. And the first bar here represents the lab germinations of all 16 comparisons. And the next 3 is an early count, a middle count, and a final count. And as you can see by the letter T groupings, there were no significant differences between the seed types were observed in laboratory germination, speed of emergence, or final emergence. The second set of trials we ran were harvest trials, which originally the same 2 locations were selected at NDSU's Carrington and Minot sites. The trials were planned for 2 years at each location. However, in 2017, after emergence, we found that the Minot trial was planted at a location that suffered herbicide carryover, and this site was discarded for the purposes of the data. The data represents 2 seed lots at each trial. Carrington in 17 and 18, and Minot in 2018, for a total of 6 comparisons. Seed from each comparison originated from the same seed field. Trials at all locations were planted using 6 replications in a split plot design with a John Deere Maximerge planter. Data was taken from 4 rows. Cooperators were allowed to choose plot length and harvest equipment. Measurements were taken, skips, doubles, harvest moisture, test weight, oil percentage, and final yield. First thing I'd like to point out here is the row length was slightly different on each location. So these numbers are converted to 100 feet of row, which is a measurement we use quite often in sugar beet, and it was just comfortable for me to use it here. Second, it should be mentioned that the data is averaged across all raw seed and pelleted treatments. As you can see from the p-values and t-groupings, p-values over here on the right, t-groupings over here, significant differences in raw versus Prosun precise with less skips and highly significantly less multiple events. While skips are not a good thing since they represent a lost opportunity for capturing sunlight by the plant, there is some compensation from plants surrounding the skip. Multiple events are not good for any reasons, mostly because you're dropping more seed than the target population. Multiples cause clumps, which may be the real driver to yield loss. When there are plants bunched up next to each other, they compete for sunlight, they compete for nutrients and water from the surrounding soil, resulting in effectively becoming weeds to each other. Lastly, while visiting the first year trials in 2017, it became pretty clear to me that the term double describing these bunched up plants was wrong. Multiple events seem to be a better description because they're not all equal. A true 2-plant double, this is over 3 years at Carrington site alone. You can see 20 compared to 4 per multiple event, up to 5, or up to 3 plants, up to 4 plants. And you dump in just a lot more seed into the ground than you are with the Prosun precise pellet. I bring this up simply to really demonstrate that difference in total seed drop. This is a picture of one of our trials. We have pelleted seed at the top and the bottom with the raw in the middle. Some observations when noting multiple events, while obviously from multiple seeds, many multiples are simply from poor seed spacing. You'll often see a gap where you have a bunch of seed and that probably just some seed floating and hanging up because the raw seed is lighter and floats a little easier. Another thing I observed over the years is that with the same planter at the same location, some years spacing can be better than others. Why is that? Well, I have no proof. I suspect spacing increases. It certainly has in sugar beet, but it's just a theory, really. So we brought these trials to harvest, and we had significant differences between the two. We had the Prosun precise in these trials increased yields over 10%. And keep in mind, this is 2 years and 6 varietal comparisons. Once again, the data is averaged across all raw seed and pelleted treatments. A difference of 172 pounds, which represents over $33 when using the latest price from Interland, North Dakota. Also, please note there were no statistical differences in oil content, harvest moisture, or test weight. So, where do we go from here? What's next for Prosun? Because we never really had Germains stop and rest on our heels. The thing about the seed pellet, it gives us many options where you can place seed treatments. They can be applied directly to the seed before pelleting, applied within the pellet blend during the pelleting process, or film coated around the outside of the seed once the pelleting process is complete. Now, again, if I take sugar beet as an example, we are currently putting on as many as 5 and sometimes 6 different fungicides, and insecticides on the seed. Some are applied directly to the seed, some are applied in the pellet material, and some are film coated after the pelleting process is complete. And when I say 5 different fungicides, I'm talking on each individual seed, not on different orders. So our focus now is to develop novel seed treatments for sunflower that will increase yield. When we really only began the process in the last year or so. This data represents 2 varieties, 1-year trials. All seed within the variety originated from the same seed field. And you can see from the T groupings, we did not get a significant difference in this case between the pellet control and the raw control. But if we go to the right, we will see that we did get a significant difference with 2 of the treatments over both the pellet and raw control, and highly significant with a p-value of non-existent. So this research will continue, and we will move forward with more trials should we get the right cooperators that agree to do the trials for us, because we do farm out all our research. We don't do it ourselves in terms of field work. This research will continue, but it'll take a couple more years to demonstrate consistency across locations and environments. So for now, this is another trial. The only reason to plant Prosun precise is for singulation, spacing, and reduction in multiple events, which we've demonstrated can lead to increased yield. I would like to thank Nuseed for providing much of the seed for these trials, and the staff at NDSU's Carrington and Minot Research Extension Centers for their work in managing the trials. Thank you.
Kevin, thank you. Maybe you got a question and maybe a little bit of time for a question as well. Talk a little bit about organic. How does this play, the process come into play with the organic grower?
Well, we have organic seed coatings. I can't speak specifically on the Prosun, but the one we had immediately before the Prosun, I know was an organic coating. We are developing organic seed treatments. We have one now that is called Ultim. It gives control of seedling pythium. We're also looking as a foliar spray and sugar beet for Cercospora. We're looking at potatoes for blight. But specifically, it is an organic treatment. We've been selling on spinach since 2017, and we expect a full label in February on peas and corn, and we'll be adding crops as we move forward. And to be clear, our Fargo factory is certified organic.
Thank you for that, Kevin. So I don't have any other questions directly.
Actually, Kevin, I have a question. We get some comments or concerns sometimes for growers that use the pelleted seed on whether or not it needs additional moisture, or if there's maybe concerns going into some drier environments at planting time. Do you have any comments revolving around that?
Well, in the emergence trials we ran, of course, it's only 2 years, but we had 16 comparisons. It was very dry up at Minot that year, and we didn't see any statistical differences between them. In the field, I imagine there could be times when it's going to be a day or two slower. In the lab, actually, the wetter you try and germinate a pellet, the worse it is. Pellets in the lab like to have a little drier germination test than they do wetter germination test. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. I know from from my personal experience, anytime we've gone into that South Dakota area on a dry spring, it seems to germinate just fine. But I know it can be on a grower's mind.
Well, it's like anything else. If anybody's listening or is interested in this, I wouldn't go throw the whole farm into it. I would get some and try it, make sure it works in your planter, and make sure you're satisfied how it works, moving through the planter, make sure you're satisfied how it's emerging. I would never recommend anybody to go whole hog into something the first year.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Kevin, for your time. I know to kind of second some of the research you guys have been doing on doubles and skips, the USDA, ARS, and Fargo is also doing some research on whether or not it's limiting yield. And really what they're finding on doubles and multiples is that it really increases your disease potential, because you really have that micro environment there as well. So
yeah, that's interesting. I never did look at that.
So with that, Kevin, thank you so much for your time. I know that we're getting lots of questions in our chat that I think we'll be able to answer typing versus in person. So some of those answers may be spoken about or answered that way. But keep the questions coming, guys. Thank you. Absolutely fantastic interaction today.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Paul Knudson. He has been with Global Harvest Foods for 11 years and is the grain manager. He grew up on a farm in northeastern South Dakota and graduated from the University of Minnesota with a degree in applied economics. He spent 15 years with ConAgra in Gavilan as a merchandiser and facility manager in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and Tulsa, Oklahoma. He works out of his home in Georgia, about an hour east of Atlanta. Paul, this is your first time joining us from Sunflower U. Fantastic to have you, very excited. Certainly works out that you can be there in your home and you didn't necessarily had to travel to the Dakotas for this event. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Alison. I want to thank Nuseed for this meeting, and the format works well in our current conditions. I'm just going to start out here kind of giving a brief overview of who Global Harvest is. Obviously, or not obviously, we're a wild bird food company. We were founded in 1982. We're owned by a family in Seattle, Washington, primarily 3 brothers that are involved in the daily business. We have 250 plus employees. We have 6 facilities across the United States, very conscious of food safety. We have to jump through many of the same hoops as companies that make human food grade stuff. In the last 2 years, we've become the #1 manufacturer of private label wild bird food in the United States. And most of it's, like I said, private label. We have a facility in Akron, Colorado, which is in the heart of millet country, which is one of the main ingredients in wild bird food. We have a facility in Allentown, Pennsylvania, that serves the Northeast, which is kind of where the primary largest segment of the bird food buyers are. We have one in Meade, Washington, which is basically Spokane, Washington. And then we have 2 in South Dakota, one in Harold, South Dakota, right outside of Pierre, and another one up in Roscoe, South Dakota, which is north central South Dakota. And that one is sunflowers only. And then we have another one in Reynolds, Indiana, which is about 100 miles south of Chicago, Illinois. And here's a brief overview of some of the companies we do business with. Certainly our customers or producers and people in the Midwest will notice Super Value. And of course, we do Kroger and Safeway, Ace Hardware, True Value Hardware. We do stuff with Costco, Walmart, Kmart, Target, Tractor Supply. I'm sure TSC, most people are familiar with. That is our largest customer. Then we also do things with PetSmart and Petco, and we do stuff through Amazon.com and Chewy.com, as well as then Home Depot, Lowe's, Menards, Land O'Lakes, and some specialty mall-based specialty shops as well. When the whole COVID-19 situation came into play, roughly over a year ago, we had some real concerns about how it was going to impact the bird food business. And it became apparent rather quickly that it added to the demand. People were staying home more, and apparently a lot of people took up wild bird feeding. And so this, we've seen growth in the last year anywhere from 10% to over 35% in the amount of bird food. And we know from being involved in some industry groups that this is not just us, it's the bird food segment in general. And of course, that translates to significant more demand for sunflowers, which is the #1 ingredient in sunflower or in wild bird food. And then we started asking questions about what's going to happen as hopefully, the sooner the better we get COVID-19 in the rearview mirror. And it appears that there's about 24% of the people that are currently feeding more or much more bird food. There's 89% of the current birders that are expected to increase or to continue with their increase of current feeding activity. And 78% of the new ones expect to keep involved in the activity, which was really, really good news for the industry because we had a aging demographic population. A lot of people that were feeding birds were, certainly over 50 and probably largely over 60. And so we were worried about the replacement people to come on board and keep that demand good. And it appears that now with the new influx of people, it's been a lot of younger people. And now that 50% of the newcomers are actually younger than 45. And it looks like the millennials are starting to come into play and participating, which is good news for not only the bird food industry, but also sunflower producers as well. And here you can see the spike of what happened when COVID came into play. And that's based on Google information. And online internet activity and Amazon have been a big influence or a big result of the COVID-19. And so a lot of people have been searching for bird feeders and bird food, which has added to our volumes. And with that, I'll kind of move on to some of the specifics on this crop this past year, the 2020 growing season, which was, a very, very good year for production and acreage. Total sunflower production, including confections, con oils, and oil type sunflowers, was up 52% versus 2019. Total sunflower acreage was up 27% versus 2019, and harvested acres were up 33%. Those are big numbers. Oil type production alone, which is our primarily interest because that's really basically the only thing we use is the oil type, and we have no preference whether it's Nusons or ILAs, we'll use either on. And the oil content, we do not check, so we're not cognizant of what the oil content, so we don't pay a premium or discount for oil content. As I said, oil type production was up 48% by volume versus 2019 at 2.62 billion pounds. Acreage was up 28% versus 2019, and yield was up by 241 pounds an acre to a record 1,802 pounds per acre, which is rather phenomenal. So Mother Nature and even the fact that we had an early frost in many areas still really didn't put much of a dent in this crop. North Dakota this year regained its status as the leading producing state and was up 79% versus 2019. South Dakota was replaced and was second this year in production and was up 40% in production. And the other thing that, as far as sunflower needs of oil type sunflowers, we typically want them to be 28 pounds minimum test weight, 10% moisture or less at delivery. And this year, the quality was so much better. We had a lot of headaches with our production in 2019 because, the prevalence of diseases that hurt test weight, a lot of sclerotinia in certain areas. And so that creates some problems because we usually typically have a printed pound weight on our bags. And if test weights are too light, we won't get the necessary quantity of sunflowers in a bag before we run out of space. So that's why test weight is so important to us, and it's made for a much easier production year this year with the much better quality overall. Going forward here into 2021, we're thinking that there'll likely be a reduction in acres this year. Some of that is a result of the other commodity prices having, escalated quite considerably. Probably primarily soybeans are going to be in there competing for acreage, and I know that acreage, certainly has expanded west and north of what were traditional areas. So there's a lot of areas that didn't used to raise soybeans 5 and 10 years ago that can successfully do that now. And of course, management is a little bit less, and the season isn't quite so long. But based on the weather information that we received here earlier in the program, we need to be cognizant of the potential for a drier year. But certainly sunflowers there do have an advantage over soybeans. Some of the other reason that we believe there might be a bit of a reduction in acres this coming year is we typically see some rotational cycles, and that dictates in some cases for producers what acres they have available to put into sunflowers, because that's an important part of management with sunflowers is not going back on a given piece of ground too frequently. So we're going to be watching that as well. I look for prices to stay very well supported, particularly from a demand perspective, as I just alluded to the increase in the demand for bird food. And I think it has to a certain extent too, just because of the related commodity prices of, like spring wheat and soybeans particularly, and corn too certainly has gone up and looks like it's going to have a good year too. Global edible demand for oil remains high and really at recent historical prices. So that bodes well for the crushers that make sunflower oil, and they've certainly kept their bids very well supported and firm, and they've continued to creep up here in an ongoing basis for the last several months ever since harvest. And I think that Eastern Europe had a poor crop this year, and so we're not seeing the imports of sunflower oil. And I think our domestic producers have more of the market, not only domestically, but I think they have more of an opportunity to export some oil too. And palm oil being at recent highs, and now the run up in soybean oil, canola oil, safflower oil, they're all at elevated values. So I think that speaks well to the chance that sunflowers, both old crop and new crop, will remain attractively priced. Drought concerns, as was talked about earlier, and I'm going to show you the most recent drought map that came out just this morning, but I think that certainly has to encourage sunflower acres because of their excellent drought tolerance. And I think that, attractive and competitive new crop prices are available, whether it's from bird food suppliers such as ourselves or the crushers largely based in North Dakota. I would describe most of the values right now on new crop as being at give or take $20 a hundredweight, with the variance dependent on whether you want an act of God clause and what kind of delivery period you're looking at. If you're looking and have to deliver something during harvest, usually that's when the weaker prices will be. If you've got storage and you can hold inventory out into 2022, whether it be January or all the way out into the June, July, August timeframes, I think your returns to storage are there. And certainly we're contracting bird food all year long. So paying a little bit of a carry and a higher price for deferred delivery is always something that we're looking for and very interested in. Here's the drought map that I alluded to that just came out this morning from the National Weather Agency. And as you can see, we've had an ongoing drought in eastern Colorado, which is mostly millet, but there is sunflower and milo growing in that area as well. And that, of course, goes in over to western Nebraska and western Kansas as well. And so they've had some real challenges this past year, and it hasn't gotten better. In fact, it's gotten worse. So they're going to have even less moisture in their subsoil profile to get a crop started this year as opposed to last year. And as the months have gone by, this drought area has expanded in up to, you know, Wyoming, Western Nebraska more so, and now it is, you know, showing itself in the Dakotas, and probably a little bit more so in Western South Dakota and Western North Dakota. So this is something that, you know, everybody in all the markets are going to be watching, and hopefully, you know, we can get some late winter wet snows and some good meaningful early spring rain systems to recharge the soil so that we can start the growing season with kind of a recharge of the subsoil moisture, because that's going to be key. But we'd certainly like to see sunflower acres go in, and not much, if any, reduction versus last year. And I think it certainly has a good fit from a revenue standpoint and a risk management standpoint on most of the people that are probably participating in this program today and our producers. And again, I'd like to thank Nuseed and Alison. I've got one more slide here with my contact information. If you got questions or interested in checking on markets or what we have for contracts, please feel free to contact me at any time. And I guess with that, I'll open it up to questions if there are any.
Very good, Paul. We do have a question, and I'll maybe just read right from it. How does international oilseed production impact U.S. bird food crop prices?
Well, they're tied closely together, because obviously we have to be competitive with the crushers to buy sunflowers. I mean, some of it's logistics, how close you are to your market, whether it's the southeastern North Dakota crush market or whether you're close to one of our facilities or one of our competitors. So freight is a big component, but we always have to monitor the crush bids, and usually are keeping pace with those bids both up and down. And of course, we have to factor in that oil premium that producers get at the crush and adjust our price to reflect some kind of an oil premium. Sometimes when oil content gets really high, you know, up above 44 or certainly 45, then bird food probably has a hard time competing for those kind of oil stocks. But usually anything that's 43 or below usually will be pretty competitive. But again, I think, you know, the crushers and sunflower oil are kind of the driving force, probably more so than the bird food segment. And as I alluded to, that Eastern European market has really come on. They've come online with increased acres and increased processing plants. So not only are they supplying to the European and some markets that more historically were U.S. markets, they've actually now, the last several years, you know, exported some sunflower oil to the United States. So the fact that they're not as much of a player this year certainly is more supportive of the sunflower crushers in the United States and the demand and price for the U.S. We don't know, of course, what's going to happen going forward. Argentina, another player, they're having some struggles with weather down there. So it looks like in the near term that the U.S. probably will have a bigger share of the world market than we have for some time.
No, very well, very well. Alison, I don't have anything in queue.
Okay, if anybody has any more questions for Paul, we do have a couple more minutes for our scheduled break. You can just go ahead and pop those questions in the Q&A function, and we'll be able to read them off for Paul. Just a couple of things while we're waiting to see if there are any other questions. So first of all, if you are hoping to get CEU credits, if you're a certified crop advisor, if you missed it at the beginning of the talk, all you have to do is reply back to the Zoom invite that you got. Just hit reply and enter in your name and your CCA number, and we'll make sure that you get those credits. There are 2.5 CEUs, one for crop management and 1.5 for pest management as well. Also, encourage you guys, if you are on social media, hashtag Nuseed Sunflower U. Feel free to go ahead and use that hashtag for today's events. have been getting a lot of people also asking if this is recording. Yes, it's actually being recorded on Facebook Live right now, and streaming. And then later on, it will be available on our Nuseed YouTube channel. So this will be available, and perfect. All right, so with that, let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break. I don't think there's any other questions for you, Paul. Thank you so much for joining us today. So let's take a 10-minute break, use the bathroom, get a cup of coffee, and we will see you all back at 10:35. Thank you. We'll start back up in about another minute, everyone. I'd like to thank everyone. We've completed the first part of our Sunflower U agenda. Thank you. Hope everyone was able to get a little break and stretch your legs. There is one thing that I wanted to comment on, because I know we get questions all the time on, for Sunflower U, why do we have both university research presented and also private industries? And I just wanted to address that, you know, we really feel that for growers to be successful and for the sunflower industry as a whole to be successful, that we really all have to work together. And it's by presenting information across all spectrums, we feel that it's really valuable for you guys to hear information from all sides. And there's experts, there's sunflower experts at the university level and also experts within private industry. So I just kind of wanted to clarify that, just so you guys don't necessarily think that it's a sales pitch on these companies. You know, we really feel that they are providing value for everyone on how to better your sunflower operations. And as our afternoon speakers talk on pest management, you'll notice maybe some of the topics will be the same, but really they're meant to build on your understanding and how it can help your operation. So with that, I think we will get the show on the road. Next up, we have Sam Markell. Sam, feel free to go ahead and share your screen. Sam is the Extension Plant Pathologist at NDSU. He joined the Department of Plant Pathology in 2007, focusing on broadleaf crop disease. The mission of his program is to develop management tools for economically important diseases, including Phomopsis, Downy mildew, and rust in sunflowers.
Thank you very much, Alison. I appreciate it. Can you hear me okay?
Yes. Yep, we can hear you and see you. Thanks, Sam.
All right. Well, I'm going to share this. Just to bear with me for just a second. All right. Are you able to see this?
Yep, looks great.
Okay. Thanks a lot. So I really appreciate the invite, Alison, and I think I applaud you and the Nuseed team for moving this program into the virtual world. It's a really good program, and I'm happy to be a part of it. So good morning, everyone. I was asked to give an update on 3 diseases: Downy mildew, Phomopsis, and rust. And I'm going to use some data that we've generated at NDSU recently, but also some of the South Dakota State work that Fabina Matthews conducted. And then there's 3 graduate students or former graduate students who've worked on sunflower diseases with me. And so a lot of what you're going to see is from them. And so Brant and Ryan and Michelle have contributed a lot to this. I think I'm going to start by just telling you the management messages that you're going to see over the next 20 or so minutes. With Downy mildew, solid resistant hybrids exist, and we continue to look at the pathogen to make sure that that is the case. And then we have an excellent seed treatment in Planaris, and we've been working on this for a few years, and I'll share some information with you. With Phomopsis stem canker, if you're at risk for this, selecting a less susceptible hybrid is going to be really important. And the company folks who work closely with those hybrids know which ones are better in which environments. And so I would make sure that if you've seen Phomopsis issues in the past, make sure you get something that's less susceptible. I'm not sure there's anything I would say is really resistant yet, but the hybrids are getting better. And fungicides can help. They're not a silver bullet, but we've conducted trials for a few years now. We have a little information to share. The last disease we'll talk about is rust, and I'm going to emphasize that scouting is critical here. Resistant hybrids can help, especially in confections, and we have excellent fungicides available, but this is a very sporadic disease. But when you get it, it can cause problems. So scouting is really critical. All right, so let's start with downy mildew. So throughout, what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about the pathogen, what it looks like, and what conditions favor it, and then jump right into management. So many of you have seen downy mildew, like you have phomopsis and rust. You see it early in the season generally. Stunting is one of the first things you'll notice, and you'll see some chlorotic blotchiness on the veins of the leaves. If you flip that over, you'll see spores on the bottom if it's humid outside, and so that white fluffy growth on the right side of your screen, that's spores of the pathogen. Here's a little closer look at them. So this is important because these spores they're not fungi. They're actually more related to algae. And why that matters is that these spores swim through water. They have tails, literally have tails, and they will swim, and they're chemotaxic, and they will go infect the roots early in the development of the plant. So if you have a lot of rain after you plant, when that seed is germinating, the radicals out, the roots are starting to grow, you may be at risk for downy mildew, and most of us have seen this. So this infection occurs really, really early in the season. As the season progresses, we don't worry about it. There's not going to be a lot of new infections. So managing it early is important. When you see it at the end of the season, this is often what it looks like. It's just a big weedy mess with a lot of blank areas. And if there's a plant alive, it's going to be studded with a little horizontal head. And at this point, it's just a weed. So all of these plants are giving you yield loss. All right, so resistance is really important here. And the companies are really good at breeding for resistance. And so selecting hybrids that are resistant, that's important. We also have seed treatments out there, and oxythiopiperlin, which is labeled as planaris, and lumicina. Planaris is very effective. So to give you a little update on what it looks like in the genetic side, we do a bunch of surveys pretty much every year looking at what the downy mildew pathogen is doing. So this pathogen overcomes resistance genes very quickly. It's a problem when you manage it. So to handle that, we go out and we survey. So this is a really robust survey we did a few years ago. We went to fields in South Dakota, North Dakota, and Minnesota. We collected isolates, and we had 185 different isolates that we tested. And we tested them against all these different genes and lines that companies have used in the past and are using in the future. And this is what we found. And essentially, the bigger the bar, the more likely it is that a pathogen is evolved. So I'll give you the cut to the chase message here. There are some genes out there that are fantastic. We see hardly any infection at all. And I don't know that any of these are in commercial hybrids yet, but I would bet that they're being bred into hybrids into the future. We see some really strong genes that are in hybrids. I know PL8 is in some of the hybrids. So we do have a little bit of virulence on it, but not much. And then we have some genes that were very effective in the past, and they're still holding the pathogen at bay, but we're starting to see that pathogen evolve. So my recommendation here is that if you're at risk for downy mildew, or you've had it a bunch in the past, talk to the companies about the resistance that they have. We work really closely with the companies, and so they all have this data. They're all working to build a better hybrid that's more resistant to downy mildew, so they will know. Switch into seed treatments. So years ago, we had the opportunity to work with an experimental seed treatment compound. This was called oxythiopiperlin, and it was being developed by DuPont. They had invented it when they were still an independent company. And through business transactions I don't pretend to understand, Syngenta now has it with labeling rights on sunflower, and it's labeled as planaris. I'm not going to show you a ton of data early in the process, but I just want to show you this photograph of what we were looking at. So this is in Fargo, and we inoculate these plants with the pathogen, we control the water, and we try to create a rip-roaring epidemic. And you can take a look at this image, and you can see where the non-treated control is that has no seed treatment, just almost instantly. There's gaps in that trial. And these other plots that are doing better are on unlabeled rates at this point of this experimental planaris compound. And so we went from a 1x, actually we went from a 0.1x to a 10x rate at this point. So by 2015, we narrowed in that rate. That would end up being the labeled rate. And so this is an example of the trials we were looking at. So how you read this is you have the treatments on the left side. So you've got a non-treated check. You've got Dynasty, which was at the 1x and the 4x rate at the time. And then you've got this experimental compound that would be planaris, which would be essentially the low and the high rates that were pushed through later on. And then you've got Bion. So this is the percent of infected plants on the chart that you're looking at. So the bigger the bar, the more plants are infected. And these plants will die, and they, of course, did die throughout the trial. And so you can see that, you know, about a third of the plants are infected in the non-treated. You've got a 1x and a 4x rated dynasty, and they're helping. You know, it's I think, you know, it's not the best, but it is making a difference. And then you've got this amazing compound where there's basically no disease. It's quite remarkable. And then Bion down here is helping as well. And for reference, the letters here that you're going to see throughout the presentation are statistical significance letters. So if they're different, that means that there's a statistical difference between the treatments. So A and B are different. So that means the non-treated check and the 1x dynasty are statistically different. All right. So fast forward another trial, I want to convey a message here about timing and residual with this planaris compound. So we had a couple of experiments in 2016 that were really insightful as to how this would work under an epidemic where it rained periodically, right? So the seed treatments don't last forever. You know, they're very effective in the first few weeks. What happens if it rains over and over and over again? Are they going to hold up or not? So here you're looking at a disease incidence graph, okay? And so you've got incidence here. So the bigger the bar, the more disease. You've got 4 different oxythiopyprolin, so planaris rates and mixtures here on these 4 bars, 2 of which, of course, you can't see yet. So you've got a low and a high rate alone, and then you've got a low and a high rate mixed with Bion. We were trying to add things in to help protect it from fungicide resistance development. Then you've got Bion and Dynasty, and then you've got this non-treated control. And between here, it was an experimental compound that we blanked out that's not labeled. All right, so this is early on. So right away in the season, you can see that over half the plants in the trial are infected with downy mildew. Dynasty and Bion, they're helping, they're reducing that. But planaris is just smoking it. So moving on to V8 to V12. So plants are obviously bigger, a little older, it's continuing to rain. So you see that you've got this, it's well over 60% now infected in the non-treated. Bion and Dynasty are helping. They're not holding as well, but they are helping. So about half the disease you'd see if you treated with one of them. And then you've got these oxythiopyprolin mixtures, these planaris mixtures. And there's a little bit of downy mildew showing up, but it's just a fraction compared to these other compounds or the non-treated. So by reproductive stages, so when the plants are starting to bud, we see the same thing continue. So there's a little bit of disease showing up with the planaris, quite a lot with Bion and Dynasty. You know, this is 25 to 40% of the plants infected. That's a lot. And the non-treated is pushing 70%. So my message here is that this compound is excellent, and it's holding maybe even longer than I might have expected, because, you know, seed treatments, they don't last forever, but even under some pressure, you do see it. So you might not turn your downy mildew to nothing, but it's going to be a heck of a lot better than the non-treated, and statistically better consistently than other things on the market. It's a great compound. Okay, switching to Phomopsis stem canker. So this one's a little trickier to manage. The way the pathogen works is it comes in through the leaves, generally. It comes in through the leaves on the edge of the leaf margins, and it'll work its way in through the petiole into the stem, and it'll cause a stem lesion that's, of course, surrounded around the leaf that it came in, right? So the idea here is if you're going to manage this, you're probably managing it at the point in the leaf where it's coming in. Once it's in the stem, you can't do much. This can be kind of a beast. This is a picture from Fabina in South Dakota State. You know, you can have really high yield loss, and we've seen that in Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, and even in Nebraska. This is a photo from Nebraska. They were trying to emphasize how much yield could be impacted, and of course these are just cut heads from a trial, and it's pretty obvious which has got a lot of Phomopsis and which does not. All right, so to manage this, genetics are very important, and there's a lot of work on the genetics. And so there are better hybrids out there already, and there will be even better hybrids in the future. It's not a silver bullet yet, but I do think that the genetics are going to continue to improve. Fungicides can help, but they're not a silver bullet either. And throughout a lot of work we've done, it looks like the optimal fungicide timing is about R1 and QOI fungicides. So this is the strobilurin group, so the headline, the quadris, the approach, they tend to be the most effective. All right, so this is an example of a trial that we've conducted, and this comes from South Dakota State. This was near Brookings in 2019, and this was conducted by Fabina Matthew and her team, and she's looking at all these different products at these different rates, And this is presenting disease severity index. So the disease severity index is the way we measure how much Phomopsis stem cankers in a trial. And it's based on number of lesion and lesion width and lesion size and lodging and things like that. So at the bottom of the screen is the non-treated. That's what this NTC is. So the bigger the bar, the more Phomopsis disease, the more higher the disease severity index. And you can see that this trial is hit really, really hard. So these products were tested and they were all sprayed at R1, which is probably about the best timing. It's a little tricky, but that's what we're talking about. And that's what we're testing at is R1, so bud stage. And you can see that there's a wide range of effectiveness. And the ones that tend to be the most effective, they're the strobilurins. And so for years, we've been working with headline because we saw effect early, but the other strobilurins are doing, I would say they're similar. You can take a look at that trial. Of course, you can see headline and Revitec, and then it goes all the way up to Provosol. So there's a lot of chemicals that we've tested, but strobilurins tend to be the best, or strobilurin mixtures. This is what yield looks like. So you can see the non-treated control again at the bottom. It's about 1,400 pounds and some change maybe. And then the highest yielding one is over 2,000. And so again, the letters are statistical difference. So if they're different behind the bars, that means it's statistically different. And it tends to hold true that the strobilurins seem to be most effective. Give you a visual of this trial. So here's the non-treated on the right, and here is headline at R1. So this was the headline at R1 was the treatment that had the lowest disease severity index. And obviously you can see that quite easily. Revitec was number 2, and that's what this looks like. Okay, I wish it was that easy. I wish it worked that way all the time, but unfortunately it doesn't. We know we can manage it sometimes. We know strobilurins work. We know R1 generally seems to be the best timing, but it's not always consistent. And that's got a lot to do with the disease itself and the environment, and the amount of rain. There's a lot of factors at play and involved. So Fabina took a look at trying to take all the data that we've had over the course of the last 5-6 years. And there's been 52 fungicide trials in Minnesota, North Dakota, Nebraska, and South Dakota in that time period. Now granted, not all of them had a lot of disease, so there's a lot of noise here. But 76% of them had a statistically lower disease severity index with a QOI or a QOI plus an SDHI. So this would be the equivalent of like a headline versus like a Prax, or still QOI. Strobilurins are the main product we're testing. 61% had greater yields than the non-treated, but that was not necessarily statistically significant. So I'll show you a little of this data. So here we're looking at the change in disease severity index. So this is reduction in disease. So how you'd read it is the bigger the bar, the greater reduction in disease. So this is all good and this is all bad. So each one of these represents the strobilurin or strobilurin plus SDHI application in a different trial. And so you can kind of see that there's a really significant reduction in disease here on this end. And then there's kind of a lot of noise here. And that's partly because environment, partly because it was maybe not a high disease pressure trial, but proof of concept is there. We can reduce the disease. Yield, though, doesn't always respond. And this is where the noise becomes more problematic. So clearly, in some of these trials, and now the bigger bar here is positive, and that's a good thing. In some of these, you do see a yield increase, no doubt about it. But all this stuff where you're seeing yield decreases and really low increases, that's a lot of noise in the trials. And remember, there's a lot of other diseases out there, and these fungicides work well on them as well. My message here is that we have the idea and we have evidence that we can help manage this at R1, but it's more difficult than just saying, hey, go out and do this and you'll cure Phomopsis. It doesn't really work that way. We can make an impact, but we need some genetics to help. Okay, I think I'm going to wrap up here with a quick note on rust. Rust is something that I'm concerned about, and it's sporadic, like I mentioned. So we've got good resistance, especially in the confections. That's good. Confections are more susceptible, and we've got fungicides that are good. And this 1% severity on the upper 4 leaves at or before R5 is the threshold, and I will repeat that. So rust needs dew. It doesn't need rain. So you can get pretty nasty rust epidemics in a drought. If you've got free moisture on the leaves, that's all it needs. And so you see these cinnamon brown pustules, that's how it starts. Eventually it can cover up your leaves pretty good. they'll start to curl the edges and take away some of that photosynthetic tissue, like this image. And you can see that leaf is not contributing much to yield anymore. And when you get it really severe, it'll hit every green part of that plant. And I've seen remarkable yield losses in excess of 80% on confections. It's rare, but it can happen. Okay, so we talk about 1% severity. That's this part right here, but I think a leaf might help you. So the threshold is 1% severity on the upper 4 fully extended leaves at or before bloom. Okay, this leaf is about 1% severity. There's rust there. There's not a ton, but there's rust there. So at R5, when it's blooming, and you might be out there for other reasons, thinking about insecticides or whatever, take a look at the upper leaves and see how much rust is there, or if there's rust at all. Okay, real quickly, we've got good compounds for rust. We really do. The triazoles, so the DMIs here, the QOIs, that's the strobilurins, they're very good. Little less effect here with some of the SDHIs, but that's okay. Okay, so how you read this, we put all these fungicide applications down at R5.2, okay, so at bloom. And this is R6, so this is, a week or two later. The bigger the bar, the more the disease. So non-treated is up here, it's in gold. And we can see that, there's some disease and it's a little bit worse than all these, but it's all sub 1%, okay? All right, a couple weeks later, you're seeing the non-treated in excess of 6%, and that is a lot. We do see yield loss at that level, no doubt about it. So this is at R7. You can see that these DMIs that we tested, in this case, it was a combination of generic tebuconazoles, but from our work, other triazoles were just as good. So you can see a really good disease reduction. With the QOIs, it's very similar. You see a really good disease reduction. I think probably this level of disease reduction is going to probably translate into maybe no yield loss at all. The SDHIs are not holding quite as well. That's just, they're not geared as well toward rust. They're much more effective on something like white mold. And if you're growing soybeans, you might recognize that some of those products are quite good, or dry beans for that matter. All right, so this is what the yield looked like from the trials we conducted in the last couple of years. So the non-treated, these are good trials. It's in excess of 2,300 pounds, but all these yields are statistically higher than the non-treated, and it's because you're managing rust. The only one really that's not statistically higher and tends to be the SDHIs, and in this particular case, the approach was not quite statistically different. Okay, I'd like to thank you all for your time, and Alison and the Nuseed team, and if there's time for questions, I'd be happy to try to address any.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. We do have a few questions, and maybe one I'll read. There are some weeds that Phomopsis that can host Phomopsis. Can mare's tail be one of those weeds? And it was maybe noticed in 2019 in a few of the counties, maybe south central North Dakota.
Yeah, so I don't know specifically about mare's tail, but we're finding that Phomopsis will actually cause disease on some closely related weeds, composites and things. But I think maybe even the greater concern is that the pathogen, and there's multiple, there's two in particular we're worried about, they can actually live as an endophyte. So like just on decomposing material, those pathogens will survive on that material. It'll keep them alive. It'll reduce our ability to manage this thing with crop rotation, which is one of our problems. And that even includes soybeans. So like there's a lot of different weeds out there that we're finding that can host this pathogen as a dead host, a dead weed. And then there's some that are actually causing disease. So I don't know specifically about mare's tail. I can check with Sabina and see if that's one of the ones that she's tested, if you wish.
Yeah, that'd be great. It'd be a great follow-up with us. So another one that comes in talking about the relationship between fungicide and oil content. Is there one? And if there is, tell us a little bit about it.
So you're talking about fungicide in terms of disease management, I'm assuming, not just like plant health. Yeah,
that's how I read the question.
Yep. Yeah. So we have seen impacts on quality in some of our trials. We have it. I know when we started working with confections, so obviously seed size makes a big difference, and that's kind of obvious. These heads are shrinking. So in our early rust trials, we definitely saw that. we have seen in multiple trials, and I'm trying to remember which pathogens we were managing, but there was a difference in oil. It wasn't as dramatic as I thought it would have been, or potentially could have been, but in a few of them there were. I think I'm going to have to go back to the data to take a little bit harder look and see if that tends to be a consistent trend. I know for sure in a few trials we saw it. I just don't know how consistent it is.
All right, great. Maybe a little time for some rapid fire ones. Notice when using fungicides, maybe takes a little longer for the plant to dry down. What do you have for findings to substantiate that?
Yeah, we have seen that sometimes in our trials as well. We've not found it as a problem, but we have seen it. But that's where maybe the small plot research loses its relevance, right? You know, you all are harvesting massive fields, and we just have to deal with these little relative things. So we see it, but we're able to deal with it. I have seen it. I have seen that some of these chemicals, especially when you're using multiple applications like we do in some of our trials, they do stay green a little longer. You know, maybe it's not a lot, and I'm not too concerned about it in the work we do, but in a major operation, that might be a concern. I don't have data that would suggest it's, you know, how constant it is or how long it is, you know, and I think that would probably be influenced heavily by the environment, actually, the effect of the chemical. But yeah, I do see it once in a while.
All right, I know we're on the clock. A couple more. Am I okay to plant a hybrid that does not have some DMR, Downy mildew resistance, but it's treated with Planaris?
Yeah, so whenever you're managing a disease like this, it's all about risk, right? You know, so if you got Planaris on it, we have not found any pathogen change to overcome that yet. And we are actually surveying again this year. It's just something we normally do, sort of like going to a physical and taking your blood pressure, right? We keep our eye on it. So I would not expect that it's overcome at all. I would expect that you have lower risk if you have a little bit of DMR resistance as well. I mean, so I would say it's about looking at risk. I would recommend you use both. I realize that's not practical all the time, but Planaris is the best seed treatment we've had for Downy mildew in decades. It is quite remarkable.
Excellent. Last question. Where do we find some of this information you shared with us? Is it available on your website?
That's a good question. So no, my website sucks, actually. So NDSU Extension is redoing the whole website, I think, and I think that's done by June. So I think with this information, specifically for the attendees here, Alison, I can give you this presentation. If you want to share it, you're more than welcome to do that. This is something that we need to do a better job of, quite frankly. I'm going to tuck tail a little bit here, but that is the case.
Just add it on to your list of things that you have to do, right, Sam?
Well, this is really important. And part of the reason that I really appreciate you inviting me is that we can get this out a little bit. And I will send you this presentation and you can share it as you wish.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much, Sam. If you guys have other questions, you can put them in the Q&A and we can try to answer them that way. So with that, we are going to be moving on to our next presentation. And I just wanted to point out, so some of this information might seem like it's overlapping a little bit, and we do that intentionally because R&D, research, and industry, we all really need to work together in order to be able to really provide the best solutions for our growers and our customers to be successful. And Dan, actually, I was thinking about your presentation, and you also might be able to answer some of those questions revolving plant health and dry down as well. So with that, I would like to introduce Dan Melaas. He's originally from the Maddock, North Dakota area and received his bachelor's degree in crop and weed science and master's in plant science from NDSU. He has worked in agriculture for the last 20 years in central North Dakota, the last 3 of which have been spent with BASF in both seed and crop protection. He currently lives near Anamoose, and he enjoys his job, which I like to hear, and anything outdoors. Thanks, Dan. This is your first time at Sunflower U, so thank you for joining us.
Yeah, no, it's great to be here. You can hear me and screen's up the way it's supposed to be?
We don't see your screen anymore, but we can see you and we can hear you.
Okay, let me.
Yep, now we can see your presentation. Looks great.
Okay, perfect. Okay, I've got it up. Hold on here. I gotta get. Okay, should be good here. So, yeah, thank you everybody. I'm glad to be here. Yes, I do. I had some answers to some of the questions Sam had in the previous one. I guess the one about the fungicide and stay green of the plant. I guess at BASF, that's one of our big deals is plant health. And we're not seeing that it's delaying the maturity of the plant. It's actually letting the plant finish better. So I can't say whether it affects oil content or whatnot, but it is keeping the plant greener longer because the plant is finishing its natural life cycle, I guess is how it put it. And in North Dakota, in my experience, is that typically our frost is about the last time that we, I mean, that's typically what kills the plant anyway, unless a person is doing a desiccation type application, which at that point, that chemical is actually what kills the plant too. So that would be my answer to that question since we just got done going over it. So, and I do have a couple of my slides that are going to be fairly close to what Sam had. So I will probably go through those relatively quickly also since they've already been presented. So my first slide here, Sam just showed this also where we had the untreated versus the headline versus Revitec. So just won't spend a lot of time on that slide. The next slide here, I just wanted to give everybody an idea of BASF's fungicides and what this is kind of our brand ladder where we work from top to bottom there. As we get further down the line, we've got more mixes actually of the products. So our first product there is Headline. This is a product that's been out for a number of years. Our active in that one is the F500. I'll leave out the chemical names. Everybody can read those if they want to, but just to give you an idea of what our mixes are. So the next product we've got there is Preaxor. And this is actually a mixture of our Xemium plus our F500. So it's Headline plus Xemium gives us Preaxor. The next one is Provosol. This is a product that just came out within the last couple of years. And we do have a couple more products that we also add. So the next one is Veltima. This one's got Provosol plus the F500 in it. And then we also have Revitec, which is Provosol, Xemium plus F500. So as we move down the brand ladder, we've got more of a premium product that's going to help knock out more diseases. As we talk sunflowers, I wouldn't say that we necessarily have seen a huge benefit necessarily on some of the more premium products, but in other crops, we have seen some excellent benefits to having all three products within those. Just wanted to give everybody, I mean, our fungicides are typically labeled at R1 to R4. We have seen probably our best results at that R2 to R4 stage. So got the picture of the R2, the immature head elongates, nearest leaf attached. But from there to R4, where we're starting to see the inflorescence come out, is typically where we've seen our best results with our fungicide portfolio. Next slide we've got here. So this is Revysol on Phomopsis. This is actually one of the trials that Sam did. I think he talked a little bit about it, but I just wanted to point out here. So this is in percent of Phomopsis disease index. So percentage of, or how much disease we had. You can see the untreated check and Provosol. Provosol really does not provide any control of Phomopsis, but as you add in the F500 into the product mix, you can see with the Preaxor, the Headline, Revitec, Veltima, they all did a very good job as far as Phomopsis control in that trial there. I've got another trial. This one's out of South Dakota. This is also one probably that Sam went over. but as you can see, the Czech and the Provosol really did not do much of anything for the disease index. As we move into the other products, you can see they did a good job as far as reducing severity. And as we increase the amount of F500 in those products, typically they did a better job even on that as far as the Phomopsis disease control goes. Next, wanted to just touch on rust to give you guys an idea of which products we've been seeing best results with there. You can see that this was not a real high severity of rust in this trial. This was actually at our research farm down by Davenport, North Dakota, down near Fargo. But what we're seeing with this, I mean, so you got the Czech, you're getting some control with just the Provosol, but as you move into the higher end products, we're typically seeing a lot better control of rust with those. So just wanted to give everybody a little idea as far as some trials that we've done on these diseases and whatnot. So kind of in conclusion with some of the trials, all the Revysol products are highly effective for control of powdery mildew and alternaria. The Veltima and Revitec are effective for control of rust, phomopsis, and phoma on sunflower. And we have not observed any phytotoxicity with any of these fungicides when using them on sunflowers. This next slide, this is more to, I guess, that last question as far as plant health goes. We have seen on farm grower trials, we have seen about a 200-pound increase by doing a 6-ounce application of headline in, I mean, it says R1 to R3, but typically that R2 to R3 is going to be what I would consider our sweet spot for trying to replicate that 200-pound advantage. This is at 27 different locations when we did the trials. So we could see a 20 or a 200-pound increase. That's a good deal. Like I said, you probably will notice that they are going to stay green a little bit longer. And in a little bit here, I will talk about some of the benefits of doing a desiccation type application to help get those sunflowers dried off. I know in North Dakota, especially, blackbirds can be one of our biggest nemesis as far as sunflowers go. And if we can get those sunflowers taken care of and off the field before the birds really set in, that's a huge deal and a huge win, because I have seen exceptionally bad bird damage over the years. Next slide here. This is just kind of giving an overview of which products we have found as far as which key diseases. I know different areas of the country have different problems. As we talked a little bit earlier here, the Provosol, you can see it's not that great on rust, phomopsis, but will take care of the alternaria powdery mildew. Veltima and Revitec, those are more the premium products that are going to help really reduce and take care of most of these disease problems that we do have out there. As you notice, we don't have headline on there. Headline, as we talked earlier, did have very good control of both the rust and phomopsis there also. And this was just another one adding in Praxor, where Praxor does a good job with the F500 in that product that will help really reduce the overall problems there. Switching gears from fungicide, Alison had asked me to talk just a little bit about the Clearfield Plus system. This is fairly new. I know there are a handful of varieties out there that do have the ability to use the Clearfield Plus system. What this is it's an increased tolerance to beyond herbicide. In just the regular Clearfield, we were only able to use 4 ounces per acre of that product, where with the Clearfield Plus system, first thing, make sure that you can use the Clearfield Plus system with those varieties. In sunflower and winter wheat, it's a 6-ounce use rate. in spring wheat. It is only a 5-ounce use rate in the Clearfield Plus system. I guess the biggest thing as far as I can tell, yes, you can have that extra couple of ounces of the Beyond in there, but you're also able to use the methylated seed oil where it's non-ionic surfactant with just in the regular Clearfield system. Being able to use that oil really heats up the mix, and that oil helps the Beyond work that much better. And you don't want to go over those types of rates because you don't want to see that flash that is sometimes associated with just the regular Clearfield system. And also make sure to be using ammonium sulfate at 12 to 15 pounds per 100 gallons of water, as you need both that MSO and the AMS to really heat up that product, and you'll get that much better of a burn on your weeds. And as we all like, dead weeds don't help reduce yield, so big deal there. Also wanted to just talk briefly on desiccation as far as proper application timing. As you can see, the bracts on the back of the head there are starting to turn brown. That is about the time a person would take a look at doing a Sharpen application. Sharpen is a product that is going to help provide a faster dry down than a lot of other products that are on the market. With this product, it has a very low use rate at 2 fluid ounces per acre, and it is not a restricted use pesticide, so it's a little easier to use. Also with Sharpen, you are going to help gain some residual weed control for the following season. As I talked with Beyond, it's also a very good thing with Sharpen to make sure you have at least 15 gallons of water to help coverage on the plants and whatnot. Also add in the MSO and the AMS to really help keep the product up and help get the right kill that you want out there. With that, that's what I had to talk about. Here's my contact information. I guess if anybody has any questions, I'd be more than happy to entertain. If you feel the need later, feel free to email me or give me a call, and I would certainly be able to help out with whatever I can.
Hey, Dan, great stuff. We do have a few questions. We got a few minutes for them.
Okay.
Number one, will desiccation reduce oil content in sunflower?
If done at the correct timing, it should have zero effect on the oil content. The biggest thing there is to not do too early of an application where you end up killing the sunflower prematurely, and that would be what would more than likely affect your oil content.
Okay, a two-part question here. What's the best time to apply fungicide?
The answer is R2 to R4 is typically the best timing that we have seen. The label says R1 to R4, but we have seen the best results from the R2 to R4.
Okay, great. This one's a question. Is there a way, or what is the best way that we can predict chances of phomopsis that would become a problem, and just help with some of the ROI on a treatment?
Okay, say that again once.
Is there some predictors, or what are the predictors in a field that kind of can give us some indications of what are the chances of having a phomopsis, that would justify a treatment?
I guess the weather patterns is going to be the biggest thing with the phomopsis is paying attention to what kind of weather conditions we have going into that timing period as far as when a person would make the application. Drier, wetter, it all makes a difference as far as disease setting in. So to me, that would be the biggest indicator of what, and then also field history or that type of thing to what a guy will see as far as that goes.
All right, here's another one about desiccation. Does desiccation affect germination?
I don't believe there's supposed to be any desiccation on seed that would be used for seed the following year.
Okay, what about if you apply fungicide applied by air, how much water would you suggest?
We would like to see at least 5 gallons by air. The more the better, but to get aerial applicators to go to more than 5 that'll be your guys' challenge, because I know how hard it is to get them to go more water. So.
Okay, maybe one last question. Is there some research that you could share with us on early season fungicide application and the benefits of it, and maybe add to a herbicide?
Okay, we have done some early season application. Typically, most of the research was done on headline a number of years ago. We do see some plant health benefits there. I don't have the research in front of me right at the moment to give you like how many pounds per acre average we were seeing or anything like that, but we have done some research. I can see if I can come up with some of that data and share it with Alison if people have more questions, or feel free to email me also. I would be more than happy to help out on that.
Great. Got a specific question about lamb's quarter. Does MSO and AMS improve the efficiency of Beyond on lamb's quarter?
Yeah, and Beyond is one of the products that does tend to be a little bit weaker on lamb's quarters. The addition of the MSO and the AMS definitely will help out with control of that. I guess the biggest thing is the MSO will help break down that plant cuticle to help get the product into the plant, thus giving us a better control with that.
No, that's excellent, Dan. There's a couple questions I think that are out there that maybe as we move forward here, you just type a reply back to.
Okay, yeah, I can certainly do that.
Yep, very, very specific. So Alison, back to you.
Perfect. And Dan, when you reply to those questions, feel free to reply to the whole group, because I think some of those questions are more than one people may want to know the answer to it.
Okay, no problem.
Thank you, Dan. And
Yep.
also a comment on the lamb's quarter. We did some of our own internal field research on comparing just MSO with a regular AMS, and we did have lamb's quarter just naturally in that little plot that we had. And I did notice that the lamb's quarter that had just the straight AMS was not going down quite as well, but it did wind up dying that had the MSO on it. So I do really think it helps, and especially in the Dakotas, some of these growing seasons maybe where our conditions aren't quite as ideal and a little bit drier than normal, we really need all the extra help that we can get to kill those weeds. So with that, we're going to keep moving on to our next presenter. Bob Weigelt joined the FMC team in 2017. He kind of jokes around that it was his rookie year when he joined, but in actuality, he has been in the industry for over 40 years. He currently serves as chair of the NSA Research Committee and has been on the board since 2015. With all of his years of experience in the industry, some of his career highlights has been the development, introduction, and success of the Express Sun system, and the ability to produce sunflower on previously difficult to raise fields. Bob, thank you for joining us at Sunflower U. The floor is all yours.
Well, thank you, Alison. Everybody see my slides, and can everybody hear me?
Yes and yes.
Well, awesome, awesome. Shout out to all the presenters so far. The program's been fascinating and informative, and you all have done a wonderful job. Also, shout out to Nuseed. I really think that in my many years of working in the industry and with sunflowers as a crop, my DuPont years and now more recently FMC, Nuseed has always been a very key partner for us. And they are certainly the ones that are so keyed into sunflowers as a seed company. And those of you growers that are working with Nuseed and buying from them, you're in good hands. That's really, I'd like to get that out there because I really do believe that. And I appreciate the partnership that we've had industry-wise with a company like Nuseed over the many years. So today's topic, resistant weed management, and this is something that you as producers, it gets hammered into you year after year, and I hope I don't sound too preachy or too repetitive. However, we just have to always keep it on our radar screen. And you know, even though those of us that have worked in the industry for so long, here's an example. My wife gave this to me for my 40th anniversary in the industry. She thinks the weeds are winning. I don't know if you guys can see this, but her opinion was, hey, Bob, when you started out 40 years ago, you were trying to kill kochia in these different crops, and you're still trying to kill kochia. What are you guys doing? I mean, can't we finally get something that can eradicate or come closer to eradicating some of these weeds? But in fact, as Mother Nature calls all the shots and has all the cards in her hand, it isn't that easy. We have our crop protection products as tools, but we've always got to be constantly looking at things like resistance. So that's the topic of today's presentation. And I sure hope that it's informative to you. Now, if I could figure out how to advance it, I'm good to go. There we go. Sunflowers, particularly vulnerable to weed shifts. And we are seeing these shifting species moving in from some of the areas maybe that aren't historically sunflower areas, but they're moving into the historic sunflower production zone. So they are vulnerable to weed shifts, as is any crop. The times are changing. You know, back in even 10 or 20 years ago, it was a lot easier to put together tank mixes. It was easy to go out and grow Roundup Ready soybeans, Roundup Ready corn. Oh boy, has that changed here in the past just 5 or 10 years. As not only weeds have become adaptable to glyphosate, but adaptable to many of our common modes of action, and the industry has not introduced a new one in about a quarter century. There's few silver bullet weed control options out there anymore. They're just not there. So we have to put together more bullets in the clip, and we've got to do some innovative mixing and some herbicide mode of action rotation, things like this. Diverse strategies, certainly Alison, when she talks about weed control in sunflowers, always leads with burn downs, and that is important. Those of you that are in a situation where you're using burn downs, keep on using them. You might, if you're not already doing it, combine your burn down with a pre. You may have to notch up, horsepower up your burn down with the pre, because glyphosate on kochia and on other weeds is not as effective anymore broadly. So you might have to spike your pre with another burn down chemical. Followed by the post systems. Dan went over the Clearfield and Clearfield Plus. DuPont discovered, and now FMC and others have the tribenduron or express type products for express sun. You've got to do all these things in combination anymore to be a top-notch sunflower producer. These modes of action are not coming along very quickly. They're scarce. We maybe need to utilize certain ones that haven't been so common in the past. And the main family I'm going to talk about today are the group 15s. Two in particular, the S-metolachlor, which is an older one, it's been around for a good 30, 35 years, and this peroxysulfone, which is newer. By newer, I mean it's been around maybe less than 10, but coming close on its 10th anniversary, I would guess, here shortly. So group 15s, when you talk about these groups, burn the group 15s into your minds. A good resource, the Bible that I use, the NDSU Weed Control Guide. Look in there for a good table on your modes of action. Start to, as farmers and as seedsmen, get a working knowledge of modes of action. Another one, the Take Action on Resistance Weed Management. Google Take Action for Resistance Weeds on your browser and have some of that stuff. It's free and they'll send it to you. And that's a partnership of industry that's getting together to address and fight resistant weed shifts. So the watch out weeds that Alison and I really want to key in here today. Our old friend kochia, friend is facetious, it's not a friend, increasingly resistant to glyphosate. The express sun systems and the Clearfield systems don't do a lot to most of it either. They're better than nothing, but not that much better than nothing. So you're either going to need to get your kochia in your burn down or use a good pre to get it. And like I said, with glyphosate becoming increasingly weak at burning off kochia, adding in another product, maybe your carfentrazone products or something else that you can add safely into your glyphosate is going to be required more and more as we go. The pigweeds are coming, the pigweeds are coming. Hate to sound this alarm, but talk to our good weed researchers. Talk to Dr. Lawrence, Dr. Kumar in Kansas, Dr. Jenks up in North Dakota here, and they'll tell you this. Be on the lookout for water hemp, moving north, moving west. Palmer amaranth. These two species that are kind of lurking on the horizon and in fact have invaded some of the western sunflower producing counties, you know, are going to be a reason to take a look at upgrading your sunflower weed control arsenal. And you might want to use some of these group 15s now before you're forced to. As one of our research guys in Nebraska put it, if you don't have Palmer on your farm, you sure as heck don't want to get it. So you might want to up your game in some cases preemptively and make a preemptive strike on some of these pigweeds from moving into your farm versus reactive as you've identified them and then have to do it. So use your group 15s more and more for pigweed species. Also grasses. Grasses have always been a given. Seems like forever we've sprayed. Used to be a Sure 2 and Select, and now it's your Selects and your generic Clethodems and maybe still some Assure 2 and Posts and all these other ones. And doggone it, they've been awesome for 30 years. But remember, sunflowers are a non-Roundup ready crop. Your Post grass products are under tremendous selection pressure. And when you're only using them for grass control, they're going to start to fall out. And in fact, this is already happening. Again, I reference very good researcher, Dr. Brian Jenks in Minot here that does a lot of the greenhouse studies. And the group 1 grasses are getting increasingly shaky. That ice on that lake is getting thinner and thinner, and one of these years they're going to fall through. So another reason to utilize some of these group 15s for grass activity. They've got grass activity as a pre. Now this is different from your older pre-products that you've been using for a quarter century, like sulfentrazone. Doesn't really have grass activity, but these newer ones do. So use them as a base treatment for your foxtails, bromes, and barnyard grass, and your broadleaf chemicals will work better, and your grass post-emerge chemicals will work better. Okay, this is, again, nothing new, big news here, but Dr. Lawrence, Kansas State, presented this information to our Sunflower Research Forum last week. Some of you were no doubt on that. And basically, bottom line, 2 were better than 1. In fact, he is showing, and other studies are showing, that 2 pre-actives out there for your sunflower pre is usually better than just 1 individual active. So he compared these products that have a group 14 and a group 15 and with things that were just single ingredients, pendimethalin, the old DNA prowl, sulfentrazone, the old Spartan charge. These are single ingredient pre's. They did not have the same degree of effectiveness on kochia and Palmer amaranth as the pre-products that combined them. And these are the brand names that he was using. And there's different brand names for these different pre-products, and I'll go through them. You can really get some awesome, awesome activity. And this is a friend of ours over in the Western Minnesota area that has severe ragweed and wild buckwheat in his sunflower fields here. And he used one of these new combination 14 and 15 products. This one happened to be Authority Edge, and had pretty good results. And this is what we call a check strip, not a skip. It didn't intend to happen, but sometimes you have these check strips. So going back onto these brand names, you can buy these chemicals that have a sulfentrazone and an S-metolachlor in the form of Authority Elite, Broadax, and or Spartan Elite. Those are 3 identical products, priced the same chemicals, do the same. They might even come out of the same faucet. I'm not totally sure on that, but they're the same. Those are 3 brands. There's other brands that incorporate this peroxysulfone. One of them is Authority Elite and Authority Edge that I just showed you, but you can also buy the proxysulfone singularly as Zidua. It's from BASF and it's a singular proxysulfone if you want to blend your own in with your own sulfentrazone brand. And you can kind of either buy these products as blended, or you can mix and match and buy the individual ones if you wish. Talk to your local retailer and agronomist. So again, Authority Elite, same as Broadax, same as Spartan Elite. This has probably been the standard for a pre for many, many years. 2 modes of action: boost your control of pigweed, boost your control of grasses versus a single mode of action product. Now these are probably a step above. You've got your longer lasting group 14 and your longer lasting 15, the peroxysulfone. I think the peroxysulfone as a better, more advanced group 15 is a step up compared to the S-metolachlor. So when you move up the ladder and you move maybe from a Broadax or an Authority Elite, and you move it up to an Authority Supreme, you are going to increase your power on a variety of species and certainly increase your longevity on a lot of these. Kochia pigweed, water hemp, bromes, foxtail, barnyard grass. People are switching to the peroxysulfone brands where they have barnyard grass showing up later in the year because it's effective on that particular grass species. So the only difference between Supreme and Edge is the Edge has a higher ratio of sulfentrazone or Spartan compared to the peroxysulfone or Anthem or Zidua. This is for the heavy soils. That's why that Edge of the Valley producer that I showed you is using the Edge. As you get out further west into our lighter soils, historically into the sunflower belt, probably Authority Supreme would be the one that has the ratio of peroxysulfone to sulfentrazone that fits you. So be careful with Edge as you get too far west. Your soils might not be heavy enough to handle it. Another advantage, again, I'll say it again, these group 15s have grass activity. This is a yellow foxtail out in Hettinger being controlled by the peroxysulfone that shows up in that Authority Supreme. By using one of these, your Select, your other post-grass products will last longer and be more effective for a longer period of time. So you can use this overlapping residual strategy with some of these 2 mode of action pre-products. For example, look at what's in some of these. 2 ingredients, sulfentrazone, peroxysulfone. They're long lasting, we know that, Kochia pigweed. The sulfentrazone portion activates with less rain required. It kicks into gear and pretty much covers your months of May and June as a producer. It doesn't need a lot of rain to get going. Your peroxysulfone portion of these products, though, needs more rain to activate. This can be an advantage when you look at it as an overlapping residual because typically it kicks into gear later in June or July and then lasts longer. And compared to the sulfentrazone, it can reactivate and reactivate again, as users are telling me and consultants are telling me they're utilizing this stuff up in the Minot area. So blending these 2 together, whether you buy them alone and blend your own or you buy one of these pre-packed products, you get an overlapping residual strategy then in what you're doing out there for your sunflowers. So up your sunflower resistant weed management game. Again, 2 is generally better than 1. The single ingredients tend to break out a little quicker than when you have these overlapping residuals. But by utilizing both in your strategy, you're going to be light years ahead in your sunflower resistance weed strategy. Look at your soil tests, look at the sunflower rates on Authority Supreme, quite a wide variety. And in most cases, our rates in the Western and Central Dakotas are going to be, 6, 7, 8 ounces, maybe. The 15.4 is a theoretical rate for heavy soils further east. But check with your local agronomists, your consultants, your seedsmen, call your chem rep like me, and we'll help you find a rate for your soil type. With that, I thank you again for your attention and attending the Sunflower University by Nuseed, and it's been a privilege for me to present to you all today. Thanks so much.
All right, thank you, Bob. Couple questions as we got a minute here. Can we apply S-metolachlor post-emergent, and how late?
S-metolachlor post-emergent. I believe I'd have to check on the label on that. I'm going to give you a tentative yes. I do know that the peroxysulfone you can post-emergent, and Zidua has a label on that. but that's maybe something to dig into your weed guides and figure out. Would not surprise me that it would have a post-emerge label for sunflowers by itself. Now, you would not want to do it when it's combined in the form of a broad axe or an authority elite, because there the sulfentrazone part would be injurious and would scorch your sunflowers. So generally the 15s are not the contact products that the 14 sulfentrazones and the others are.
Sounds good. And there's a number of questions, if you've got a few minutes afterwards, just to
Absolutely.
type answers to that all of our attendees
Yep.
can see.
And I
these.
may have to run right after here for an appointment, but if you can get these to me and who they came from, I will be sure and follow up via email or with a phone call.
Sounds good. One more quick one. Common ragweed, which product gives the best control as a pre-emerge?
Looking at the results we've seen with the peroxysulfone products, better than the sulfentrazone. So these, again, these combination products, that shot I showed you from Western Minnesota was a horrible common ragweed infestation. And my guess is the peroxysulfone part of that authority edge was carrying the load on ragweed. Maybe the sulfentrazone Spartan was kicking in a little bit, but the two of them were very, very effective. I think the peroxysulfone, again, is a ingredient that shines on that compared to some of our older chemistries.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Bob. Thank you so much for joining us. If you do have a couple minutes, take a look at some of those questions and you can post them for everybody to see.
Sure will. Thank you, Alison.
Yep. Thank you so much for joining us. Next up, we have Dr. Janet Knodel. She is the professor and extension entomologist at North Dakota State University. For the last 20 years, she has provided statewide program leadership for extension entomology, the North Dakota Integrated Pest Management Program, and coordinates the NDSU Crop and Pest Report. Her extension outreach and applied research focuses on insects of field crops and IPM strategies, including sunflower insect pest management. Janet, thank you so much for joining us today. The floor is yours.
Okay, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay. And you can see my slides?
Yes, it looks great.
Okay, yeah. Thanks very much, Alison, for the invite to speak today. And I'd like to thank all the organizers of the Sunflower University as well. It's an informative meeting so far. So Alison asked me to take a look at the National Sunflower Association survey, and the last one that was conducted was in 2019, and which insect pests were the most common in the Dakotas. And after taking a look at that 2019 data, I reached the conclusion it's mainly insects that attack the head and seeds. So, and I'll be talking about sunflower moth and banded sunflower moth today, and then Dr. Varenhorst, who's going to follow up after I'm done, we'll talk about the red sunflower seed weevil. So banded sunflower moth, you're probably familiar with this pest. It's in the family Tortricidae. The adults are very small, about 1/4 of an inch long and a 1/2 inch wingspan. And you can identify it by a brown band going across the middle of the wing when the wings are folded. The larvae are very tiny when they first hatch from the eggs. They're off-white. When you have a mature larvae, they have a dark brown head capsule and they change colors to red or green when they're mature. They can be about a 1/2 inch long. And the mature larvae will enter into the seed. Usually it's near the wide end, and they also exit that way. The damage is caused primarily from the larval feeding on the florets and seeds. This can impact pollination and also reduce the number of seeds and yield. Each larvae consumes about 6 to 11 seeds, and in the process of their feeding, they spin a strand of silk or webbing on the face of the head. And you can see the webbing here in the photograph. They will consume the whole seed most of the time. For the biology, we only have one generation a year. If we start when the larvae exits the seed in the fall and crawls into the soil for overwintering as a partially mature larvae. Then next year in June, they'll pupate where they transform into the adult moth, and we typically see the moths emerging in July. They'll mate, and then the females lay eggs on the outer bracts, usually in the R3 stage of the sunflower. And then we have the larvae feeding in the florets and also in the seeds in August and late July. There is a similar pest to banded sunflower moth, and we kind of lump it together into IPM of the banded sunflower moth because the biology and the crop damage is very similar. That's the arthritis sunflower moth, and it's identical in size, and it's very different though with coloration, as you can see. It's white gray, and it has a couple white bands on the wings. There's a couple different thresholds you can use to determine if you need to treat the field. The first one is for egg sampling, where you look at the number of eggs per bracket. You do need those head-mounted magnifiers, and the threshold takes into account the treatment costs, the market price, and the plant population. And there is a NDSU extension YouTube video on how to do the egg sampling. If you're interested, just Google for that. While most of us probably scout for the adult moth during the day, and that threshold is the number of moths per 100 plants. And it also is a dynamic threshold taking into account the treatment costs, market price, and plant population. So I have a table that I put together, and I often put this information into the crop and pest report so you don't have to do all the math. But generally, it's been quite low for the last several years. We've had a threshold for the moth of about 1 moth per 100 plants. The other one is the sunflower moth. It's in the family Pyralidae. It's kind of more of a gray, larger moth, about 3/8 of an inch long and 3/4 inch wingspan. And you can identify it by that dark disco dot in the center of each wing. And this one does not overwinter here. It migrates up from the southern states. It primarily overwinters in Texas. The larvae have alternating light and dark banding on longitudinal going along the body, and the body is light brown. It's fairly large, about 3/4 of an inch long when it's mature, and it feeds on many different plant species in the Composidae family. The damage again is caused by the larvae. They feed on about 96 florets and 3 to 12 seeds, and they will just destroy the back of the head by tunneling through the tissue. That serves as an entry point for diseases, and you can often get rhizopus disease head rot moving in, which will destroy the whole head. And this insect also does the webbing as it does feeds across the face of the head. And in the picture in the upper right corner, you can see that head is just messy, and it's completely destroyed by sunflower moth. There's hardly any seed in that. I took that when I was down in Kansas. The economic threshold for this insect is 1 to 2 adults per 5 plants when you're out scouting. We can also use pheromone traps as a threshold, and it's 4 moths per trap per day from the R3 to the R5 growth stage. For the biology, I already mentioned it's a migratory pest up here in the northern Great Plains. The adults, as soon as they get up here, they'll be attracted to those early blooming sunflower fields, and the female will deposit eggs on the heads, often the face of the head, and they hatch in about 4 to 5 days. And they'll feed on the pollen, the disc flowers, and mature seeds, and then in the process, they destroy the back of the head tissue as well. And they will try to overwinter here in North Dakota and other South Dakota, but they are not successful, thank goodness. So we have a pheromone trap monitoring network that we've been doing for the last 10 years or more with the Integrated Pest Management Survey Program. The IPM Scouts do the monitoring. We use the wing trap, which has a sticky trap bottom, and we get everything from Great Lakes IPM if you're wondering where to purchase these commercially available traps and lures. And there's a video online on insect pheromone trapping. I would recommend that you watch it because there is some sort of proper standard protocol for doing the trapping correctly. So the pheromones generally just attract the male moth, and they're very species specific. So you're going to get mainly banded sunflower moth in that lure and trap. So when the moths, it's very useful with the trapping because we know when the moths are emerging in an area or if they're migrating into an area like the sunflower moth, and we can also tell where they're at in their cycle, if they're peaking right now or not. So trap catches, however, are not always a reliable indicator for action thresholds and treatment thresholds. And of course, the exception is the sunflower moth. So here's some data from our IPM survey program last year for banded sunflower moth. You can see that they started to emerge in early July, and then they peaked in mid to late July. And again, you can see I selected sites from different areas of North Dakota. And you can see that some of the other areas had a little bit later peak, and that was probably due to the weather. We do have a relationship between the trap catches for the banded sunflower moth and also the egg counts. So the egg counts are a little bit behind the first emergence, but it does follow the trend of the adult moth fairly good. The authorized sunflower moth, first you can see if you look at the scale, it only goes 0 to 80, whereas the banded sunflower moth, it went all the way up to 250 moths captured per trap per week. So this is a much not as prevalent as the banded sunflower moth. But again, you can see they started to emerge in July and peaked in mid to late July. For sunflower moth, fortunately, we didn't really get significant trap catches until mid-July, but it never really reached any of the sites, the threshold 28 moths per trap per week. So that's good news. So I want to just review quickly some crop staging, because many people don't know they do this incorrectly, and it's very important for controlling the insects that infest the head. So R4 is the bud stage. when the ray flowers will become visible. And you can see in the first picture, this is pre-R4 when you don't see any yellow ray flowers yet. And then early R4 is when the bracts are just starting to pull back and you may see some yellow petals. Mid R4 is when the bracts are opening more and you can easily see the yellow ray petals. And late R4 is when the backsides of the ray petals are fully exposed and lifting off the face of the head. And a lot of people will count this as bloom, but technically you do not count this when you're trying to figure out what percent bloom. Do not count the late R4s. So R5 is the flowering stage. R5.0 is when some of the ray petals are now standing erect on part of the face is being exposed. R5.05 is when the ray flowers are open and the florets around the outside edge of the head had started flowering. And R5.1 is when the disc flowers are blooming all the way around the outside of the head. And the 0.1 refers to 10% of the total area of the face of the sunflower. So you can see in the R5.5, about half of the total area of the face of the head is or already has bloomed. So when do we spray for head infesting moths? Well, we assume that we're at the economic threshold and we need to get an application on. So we want to direct the insecticides at the adult moths and the young larvae. Well, the ideal time based on past research is when most plants are in the R5.4 stage, or 40% of that area on the face of the head is blooming the florets. However, we need to get the aerial pilot scheduled, so we recommend that you make the decision a little bit earlier. So we say about 50% of the plants in the fields at R5.1 to 5.3, and then the remaining in the R4 stage or bud stage. So if you take a look at this picture, you can see that it's not quite at 50% flowering. There's a few, but there's more in the bud stage yet. So you would not want to spray, it would be too early. So, and the reason why we want you to delay it is because we want to target the insect, at the optimal time based on its biology. So we want the majority of those eggs to hatch and you want young larvae present, and you don't want to spray too late because then you're going to have the mature larvae protected already because they're feeding on those kernels inside the seeds. And remember, if you're spraying a blooming sunflower field, they're highly attracted to pollinators. So you need to spray in the early AM or late PM to help protect the bees that will be back at their hives at those times. So, and just a little update, I don't know if you've looked at the drought monitor recently, but North Dakota is in a severe drought for much of the state, and the rest of the state is as abnormally dry or moderate drought. So this is going to impact the type of insects that we're going to have problems with in 2021. And South Dakota doesn't look too much better. So we probably are going to see grasshoppers. So I would recommend that you highly scout for grasshoppers and be aware of what they're doing, both in the early on in the nymph stage and then the adult stage when they are very mobile. And this is from Adam Varenhorst, these pictures. He had some problems last year with grasshoppers in his weevil trials. And here's some of the IBM survey data the scouts sweep for grasshoppers in the edges. And you can see in 2019 versus 2020 on the right, you can see there's a lot more yellow and red. Some of it's hidden by some of the yellow triangles, but they are increasing. So scout for them. Here's some of the insect resources that are available. I'm sure you're aware of the new sunflower production guide that Hans Knodel has organized and helped put together. So if you have any questions, feel free to email me. And I think there might be a minute for questions.
There is. Excellent presentation. So a quick one. Pheromone traps available to where at and available to farmers.
Yes, they're commercially available, and I get all of my trapping supplies from Great Lakes IPM. There is some other sources like Gamplers, and then there's another one out in Washington, but I usually go to the Great Lakes IPM because they're in Michigan. So
excellent. And this is maybe a question that transitions into our next speaker as well. But the balance between the insects that damage and the insects that provide some benefit to the cropping environment. What's your opinion on those beneficial insects?
Well, the beneficial insects do provide natural control of many of our insect pests. Part of the problem with some of the sunflower head infesting insects is that they get into those seeds so quickly that some of the predators do not have, and parasitic wasps do not have enough time to provide control. But you're more likely not going to see the control that year. It's kind of a delayed action where we see the control in a reduced population the following year. So yes, it is very important. And I know some of the newer insecticides that are coming out on the market are more selective, especially for some of the piercing, sucking insects like aphids. And some of these insecticides are more friendly to lady beetles and other predators, as well as the pollinators. But unfortunately in sunflower, we're still, mainly relying on broad spectrum insecticides like organophosphates and pyrethroids. So they will kill all of the natural enemies out there, as well as the pest.
Excellent. Thank you, Janet. There's a few questions that if you got a few minutes to stick around to respond to broadly, it'd
Sure.
be beneficial for our entire group. Thank you. Alison,
Okay.
to you.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you. And thank you very much, Janet. I know in our own experience from scouting fields this past summer, some of those insects, the banded sunflower moth was definitely a problem. And the Great Lakes IPM that you mentioned, that's where we get all of our pheromone trapping supplies as well. So they come highly recommended, and they've always shipped things very fast. And I think
Yes.
the prices are very reasonable as well for those pheromone traps.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. Couple housekeeping things. If you missed it, if you are wanting CCA credits for this, all you have to do is reply back to your Zoom invite, and that will send an email to me, and you just need to put your name and your CCA number. I know I've been receiving people's name and numbers all morning, so keep it coming if you want those CEUs. There are 2.5 CEUs from today's webinar. Also, hashtag Nuseed Sunflower U if you're on social media. And this presentation is being broadcasted live on Facebook, and it's also being recorded and will be put up on YouTube if you want to view parts of it later. So with that, I will hand the floor off and introduce our last speaker for Sunflower U. Dr. Adam Varenhorst is an assistant professor and field crop entomology extension specialist in the agronomy, horticulture, and plant science department at South Dakota State University. where he oversees research related to the management of insects in South Dakota's major agricultural crops. His overall goal is the development of integrated pest management programs that are economically sustainable for South Dakota producers. Adam, thank you so much for joining us today. And I know a lot of us are really looking forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the introduction, and thank you all for sticking around. So my title, as it says, is going to be focused on red sunflower seed weevils, and particularly how can we manage them, and are pyrethroids still effective? So I'd like to thank everybody that's listed here as a co-author. They were integral for not only the South Dakota data collection, but Jan and her team for the North Dakota data collection. So the red sunflower seed weevil is a native pest of sunflower. It's also an annual pest. So a lot of times in these talks, we talk about how insect pests are sporadic. For red sunflower seed weevils in South Dakota, this has gone beyond being a sporadic pest. It's pretty much, we can guarantee we'll have issues, at least in a large percent of our sunflower fields. And so a major management challenge. One of the issues we have with this pest is if it's left unmanaged, it can infest 50 to 80% of the achenies. This is a major issue because the larvae feed on developing seed. Now, the red sunflower seed weevil larvae won't consume the entire seed. They'll leave some of it. If we harvest too early, they'll still be in the seed, which can cause some issues with storage. But typically, towards the end of the season, they'll drop out and they overwinter down in the soil. Now, the adults are primarily managed using foliar insecticides. I mentioned the larvae are going to be in those achenies. They're a little bit tougher to get insecticide to if it's not impossible. So we're trying to manage the adults. And the reason we talk so much, I said they're an annual problem for us in South Dakota, but in addition to just seeing them out in the field, we're also seeing field outbreaks in South Dakota that are 10 to 100 times over the threshold of 4 to 6 adult weevils per head. So we're seeing heads that I've seen videos where the heads just look like they're crawling because there are so many weevils on them. And in this picture, this wasn't sprayed. When we scout, a lot of times we'll use bug spray with DEET to get the weevils to emerge from the head. And we didn't need to spray this head to see all those weevils that are on there. So very large populations in almost every field we look at. In addition, we started receiving reports of field failures. So insecticides were being put out to apply or applied to manage this pest. And then we were seeing populations that weren't responding. So we ran an efficacy trial for the last few years, and we know we are killing a lot of the red sunflower seed weevils adults. This picture here is from one of those spray trials 24 hours after we applied the product. All these dead insects on the top are pretty much red sunflower seed weevil adults. So first of all, that shows us thresholds 4 to 6 per head, an average of 4 to 6 per head. We had a few more than that. But what was also concerning is when we were out here counting, we were still finding weevils actually on those heads. So in looking at our South Dakota Pest Management Guide for sunflowers that we put out, we update it every year. We have 47 insecticides that are labeled for red sunflower seed weevil management in sunflower. Delving a little deeper, we see that 29 of those have just a pyrethroid class active ingredient. Out of that 47, 5 have a combination of at least one pyrethroid active ingredient, and most of the time, the second ingredient for the active ingredient is an organophosphate. And then 13 are just organophosphate active ingredients. Now that list will be changing a little bit going into 2021 because there are some products with the active ingredient chlorpyrifos that we won't be seeing. So our field failures started in 2017. And as you can see, they haven't stopped. So 2017 and 2018, though, were the very busy years. A lot of people having issues. 2019 and 20, though, we are still receiving reports. So that's why we started this project of looking at what's going on out there. Are the weevils actually having reduced susceptibility, or is there something else that we're missing? And one of the issues we had is that we'd receive a field failure report, before we could get out to the field would be resprayed, because I'm in Brookings and so are my employees, and most of these fields are 3 hours away. So if we get a call in the afternoon, it's tough to get to that field before the next treatment actually goes on it. So we had to get a little bit quicker in going out and sampling. And Jan already showed these pictures, but our 2020 field efficacy trial was a little bit of a miss this year. So we were out there scouting 1 week and everything looked fine. And then my student who's working on this project went out the next week, so about 7 days apart. And this is the picture I received. And he goes, "What happened?" And at first he thought maybe just when he was approaching the field, he thought maybe we hadn't heard about a major hailstorm that had gone through. But as he got closer, he noticed that we had a lot of grasshoppers out there. And so these are two-striped grasshoppers, and they literally wiped out that plot. By the next week, we didn't even have heads really left. So in about a week and a half to 2 weeks, if left unmanaged, sunflowers can cause a lot of defoliation as well as head injuries. So something to keep an eye out. As Jan said, we might have issues with those next year. The reason we didn't spray our grasshoppers was we wanted to spray the weevils that were out there, but then we just didn't have anything to even spray. So we ran a glass vial assay for the last couple years, and I'm just going to show the 2020 data for this. And so the idea of these glass vials is that instead of running full field trials, we can actually target fields where we're seeing weevil populations. We can collect weevils, bring them back to the lab, then put them into these pre-treated vials and see how many die. So we had 4 treatments: acetone, which is a volatile product, which was used to mix our other products in with, so that they actually evaporate and aren't just a liquid in the vial, which would almost 100% kill the weevils. But we used lambda-cyhalothrin, S-phenvalerate, and zeta-zypermethrin for our active ingredients. So these are all pyrethroids. And for these, we had 2 rates. We collected red sunflower seed weevil adults at the onset of flowering. And that's important because in 2019, we collected weevil adults, and in some instances, we believe the fields had been treated. So we may have been sampling individuals who are already challenged with an insecticide, which may have skewed the results. So we got out to the fields before they were sprayed this year. We sampled 12 locations in South Dakota, 9 locations in North Dakota. 10 adults from those collections were placed into each vial 24 hours after their collection period. So we let them rest, so we didn't have just stress deaths occurring. We made sure we were selecting individuals who were still moving around and hadn't died in the wait period. And then we evaluated those vials 24 hours after the weevils were placed in to see how many were still alive. The rates of the insecticides used varied by the product, and why we chose these rates was we chose the normal rates labeled. So these are the higher normal rates that are labeled for red sunflower seed weevils and sunflowers for these products. And then we chose the lowest labeled rates for each of these products. So with the exception of Mustang Max, there was a clerical error. We chose the rate that doesn't actually cover red sunflower seed weevils for the low rate zeta-zypermethrin. So next year we'll have to correct that. So for the 2020 sampling sites, as you can see, they're marked with the yellow stars here, yellow bubbles with the white stars, I guess, technically. But we had sites, we tried to get some sites further west where we were seeing sunflower production, but the bulk of our sites, as you'll see, were kind of in Hughes and Sully counties in South Dakota. And the reason for that is that's where we were receiving a lot of our reports of field failures. So we wanted to get a good idea of what things were actually looking like there. So on these graphs, these are going to show us the mean corrected mortality. If you see the little bars, that's the standard error, the mean. You'll notice we don't have that acetone or the untreated control. The reason for that is that treatment is used to correct everything else, and that's where we get this mean corrected mortality. So everything's corrected to what the survival looked like in the control. The reason we do that is if you had a few individuals in your control die, you're able to actually correct everything so that we're on an even playing field across the board. So for our treatments, we had the lambda, S-fenvalerate, and zeta-zypermethrin. The blue bars for South Dakota represent the low rate, and the yellow, the standard rates. So our first location was out in Pennington County. If we look, it was we called it New Underwood. That was the closest town, and it was 1. So we didn't see a lot of issues with any of the products there. And we didn't see any issues at the second field in that area either, which isn't a surprise because we haven't received any field failure reports from that area. We did see the red sunflower seed weevils there though, just not a lot of issues. This Milesville, which is in Hawken County, this has an asterisk next to it because this was actually one of the few fields we had that we went out because it was a field failure. So we hurried out there, collected specimens before the field was retreated. So for these, we see that we actually have some separation from 1. So right here, if we're at 1, that means everything in the field died. If we see these asterisks, that means our percent here, which it's a proportion on the scale here, but you can think of it as a percent. So that means that this value was actually significantly different from 1, or we are significantly different from 100% management. And so we saw that our low rate lambda cyhalothrin, as well as our low rate zeta-zypermethrin weren't effective. What's interesting was this field was reported for a failure for S-fenvalerate. And so we saw that there were some deviations from 1. So we weren't at 100% management for it, but we weren't significant from 1 there. So moving forward, we've already discussed maybe collecting more individuals and making our sampling even more robust to try to make sure we can see those issues when they're actually occurring in the field. Our next location for South Dakota was in Hughes County. If you're not from South Dakota, Canning Road won't probably mean a lot, but for a lot of us, this is the road that runs south from Blunt and is kind of a landmark from my understanding. Looking here, we saw some numerical differences from 1, but our zeta-zypermethrin low rate, which I'll remind everyone again was below the labeled rate, had a significant difference, so it wasn't working effectively. Our second location on Canning Road saw that we had some issues with S-fenvalerate, both the low rate and the standard rate, so things weren't working well here. We also saw some numerical issues for the lambda cyhalothrin. Moving north now, we're closer to the town of Blunt. We saw that our zeta-zypermethrin, both the low and the standard rate, didn't work well. And we also, again, saw some numerical differences. So we're seeing some evidence that the insecticides in this area probably are leaving some individuals alive. So imagine this on a field scale, probably quite a few weevils still moving around out there. Our Blunt location 2 had no significant differences from 1, but we again saw some numerical differences. Now we move to the Herald area in Hughes County. Our zeta-zypermethrin low rate was significantly different from 1, indicating that it wasn't working well. Our standard rate for the zeta-zypermethrin also didn't look the best, but wasn't significant. Moving now westward on Highway 14, we've reached the junction. This is another landmark for those of us from South Dakota. Again, at this location, we saw that zeta-zypermethrin wasn't working the best, the low or the standard rates. The junction location 2 had no significant differences, but we see similar numerical trends with the zeta-zypermethrin. Now we're moving north, and we get to our first Oneida location in Sully County, and we see that we're having statistical differences, so major issues for lambda cyhalothrin, both rates of S-fenvalerate, and the low rate of zeta-zypermethrin. This is our first location where we saw large numerical differences also though for the lambda cyhalothrin. Our second Oneida location, which was just a little bit further west, saw some issues with the zeta-zypermethrin treatment. Now for North Dakota, I mentioned Jan tested 9 fields, so they collected individuals from 9 fields in 6 counties. So you can see they spread out quite a bit. From visiting with Jan, they typically don't see as large of red sunflower seed weevil populations as we have been in South Dakota. So for Jan's data, I actually was able to combine all of her locations because there weren't differences from location to location. And if we look at the mean corrected mortality for North Dakota, we see that everything when it was corrected is pretty much right at 1. So good news for people in North Dakota, your insecticides look like they're still working well. So just wanted to share that data as well. So our conclusions from this year of the study, it looks like we're seeing reduced susceptibility with lambda-cyhalothrin at 2 of our South Dakota locations, S-fenvalerate at 2 locations, zeta-zypermethrin, and this needs to have an asterisk, at 7 locations. However, when we take into account that we are using the lower than labeled rate for red sunflower seed weevils, it actually corrects out to we saw issues at 3 locations. And so we need to correct that zeta-zypermethrin low rate for 2021 to make sure we're giving a fair comparison, make sure that everything makes sense, but we did still see some issues. From this, Jan and I have both agreed, it looks like we need to look at more locations in 2021. So it's starting to look like South Dakota probably has a bit of an issue on our hands here as far as using pyrethroids for red sunflower seed weevil management. We didn't see any evidence in North Dakota though. And so some reasons why susceptibility might be reduced is if we think about managing insects in sunflower during flowering, getting coverage, really good coverage, can be difficult at times. We're also in South Dakota, we're looking at these really large red sunflower seed weevil populations, which means that even though we're probably knocking a lot of individuals out in the field, there are going to be individuals that persist. Historically, red sunflower seed weevils just have been difficult to manage. And when you have large populations, you have the result of routine treatments year after year. And if we're not switching around which mode of action we're using, there's a good chance that we've increased the selection pressure over time. And maybe that's why we're starting to see these individuals. We do think we did a better job here in 2020 than in 2019 for timing. And we think that also we increased the number of weevils from 2 to 10. We think we had a lot better data that was more reliable here this year, even than what we had in 2019. I'd like to thank the funding sources that funded this project for the 2020 season, which were National Sunflower Association and also South Dakota Oilseeds Council. I'm going to put in little information for South Dakota State University Extension. We've been doing a crop hour session on March 2nd through the 5th. We'll be covering sunflowers. So if you'd like any information and you're from South Dakota or if you're from somewhere else, please feel free. It's an hour-long virtual webinar that we're just trying to help everybody since COVID-19's made it a little bit harder for us to get out and about. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody for your time today. If you'd like to get a hold of me, I'm working remotely pretty often and also on meetings, so my number might not be the most reliable way to get a hold of me, but my email still is. So if you shoot me an email, I generally respond to those most of the time same day or at least the next day. So thank you again for your attention. And I see there are a few questions, so if there's time, I'd be happy to answer those.
Go ahead, Adam.
All right, so the first question is, what are the options out there for producers to have good red sunflower seed weevil control in South Dakota? So far, our evidence looks like probably organophosphates. So it isn't highly unusual. Most of our field failure reports were actually for lambda-cyhalothrin. So the one this year for S-fenvalerate was new, but either a single active ingredient from the organophosphate class will likely work. We haven't heard a lot of issues associated with that product, or doing a tank mix of a different pyrethroid. A lot of people like S-fenvalerate, that's Asana, doing that with an organophosphate. The big difference between those two classes, aside from just their modes of action, is also residual period. So typically organophosphates have a little bit shorter residual period, but that is an issue we're going to be looking into more into the future, especially as we start seeing these, and we'll try to address that more as we move forward, but that's the best answer I can give you at this time.
No, that's great. Seeing no other questions, Alison, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Yeah, thank you. Adam, I actually have a question for you on the red sunflower seed weevil, because I know it is a huge issue in the state of South Dakota. Do you notice that, is there ever a difference on a wet year versus a dry year with influxes in how bad they are?
That's a really good question. And I started at SDSU in 2015. And I can say pretty comfortably that this pest has just been a pretty much continual issue since I started. So the last 5, now we're moving into 6 years, which is kind of unusual for any insect pest. A lot of times we'll see a pest, if it's been around and native like this one, they typically go in cycles. And so to see it be such a continual problem, I don't think that weather maybe is as much of a factor. One of the things I'm interested in looking into, though, is it something to do with just having these large populations and having sunflowers grown in closer proximity? And in visiting with Jan, we haven't been able to really track down how far these adults can move. So we know they're emerging from last year's sunflower fields and moving into the current years, but we don't know how far they can actually fly. So it may be a bit of a neighborhood effect where you yourself might not have sunflowers in your field again, but maybe your neighbor does, and maybe the rotations are matching up. But it's kind of tough with this pest, because there's a lot of information out there on it, but there's also a lot of unknowns. And so we hope to delve into that a little bit now that we know there are some issues.
Okay, thank you. See, it's always the neighbor's fault. Thank you. So just wanted to say a couple of points and topics to close things up, and then actually we'll reopen the floor up for any questions. We certainly have some experts as panelists still on the call. We have some of our field sales leaders, also Trig and Darius, that I talked about at the beginning of our webinar. So if there are any also general agronomic questions, we would also be more than happy to answer some of that as well. So thank you to our presenters. Without you guys doing the work and saying yes to helping us out, you know, we really would not be able to put this on. So thank you to our presenters, and to also to those companies and the researchers for continuing to fight for sunflowers and to continuing to put sunflowers on your labels as well. So watch for 2 follow-up emails. One will be a short survey, and the key that I really want to make on this survey, I would really encourage everyone to fill it out. It gives us an idea on how we did, how we can improve. You know, maybe if you would prefer in the future for this to be a virtual event versus in person, or maybe we need to do a blend of both. Because this was a virtual event, we didn't want to necessarily make it all day long. So usually we do have a few more speakers. And so, you know, there's certainly a lot more topics that we can dive into, such as blackbirds. There's a lot of research being done on blackbirds. There's a lot of other equipment. There is grain drying and storage topics. There are a lot of other topics that we can really dive into. Pollinators, there's a lot of research being done on whether or not bees are beneficial to sunflowers. So there's a lot more topics that we're able to do in the future as well, or to keep rotating into our Sunflower U events. So please fill out the survey on that. That'll help give us an idea on that. And then also, second thing, there's going to be an incentive for attendees if you want to have a sunflower discussion with a Nuseed partner. That will be available to you as well. And Janet had mentioned that there is an updated NDSU sunflower production guide, and it is hot off the press. Actually, I shouldn't even say it that way, because it hasn't even been printed yet. We were actually hoping to get hard copies of these, and we could not get them. And so the hard copies will be coming eventually, but for right now, it's just in a digital format, but we'll be sharing that with everybody that was on this call. So just watch out for some of those follow-up emails, and the online recording will be available on Facebook and YouTube. And then lastly, if you are a certified crop advisor and you want CEUs, there is 2.5 credits available for today. Just reply back to the Zoom invite. So just hit reply back with your name and your CCA number. So with that, Justin, do we have any just general questions? I know we're heading up against our 12:30 time, but if people want to stay on for an extra 10 minutes, we can certainly get a few questions answered if there are any.
There are a couple questions in queue, but I'm not sure we have some of the experts on that some of the panelists. I'm not sure that they're with us. So maybe we just take those offline and we can reply back, but nothing else in queue.
Okay, perfect. I know that there was some questions that were replied back to that I thought would be good kind of for the group to hear. Let me see here. Oh, now I gotta find the answers. Oh, okay, so some of these are available in the Q&A. They were responded to, but I think it would be good just to read them out loud. Spraying for banded sunflower moth and uneven bloom. Of course, this can happen. I saw this a couple years ago when there was a dry spring and we kind of had a lot of uneven emergence in our sunflowers. And so the question was, is it better to spray too early or too late? And I'll just read Dr. Knodel's response. Yes, it is better to be early than late. You do get some residual with the OPs about 7 days and pyrethroids about 10 to 14 days, depending on rates and air temperatures. The other one was also for Janet, and that was, the comment was, I thought early spraying was to attack the head moth, not the larvae. Which is it? And Janet, actually, I see that you're still on the call. Do you just want to talk about what you wrote there?
Certainly. Yes, they're not typically a severe problem up here in the north, so I don't know if you're from the Kansas, Texas area or not, where it is a severe problem. And we generally focus on the adults and early larvae before they enter the seed, because they're on the face of the sunflower as a young larvae feeding on the pollen and the florets. So that's when you want to target it, and you're also getting the adults that will be laying eggs as well. And then typically down in Kansas, they have severe populations there, and they have to spray twice in Texas as well to control the sunflower moths, because there's just so many of them. This is for oilseed. They typically spray when they're at threshold, and they'll then spray again about 7 days later. But yeah, we generally want to target both adult moth and early larvae when they're real young on the face of that head. They're easier to control. So it's for us here in the north, it's hard to know when they get up here. And we're not looking for them because we're more trained to look for banded sunflower moth and weevils. But keep your eye out because they come up, usually it's mid to late July. The earlier they get here, the worse problem we're going to have up here. I remember back when I was in Minot, in Williston, they had their sunflower variety trial, and they weren't checking it at all for any head infesting insects, and it was taken out. It was completely destroyed by sunflower moth.
Okay, yeah, and you did see an increased number this past year, and
yes,
and some of my coworkers chatted, in the past, we have not had pheromone traps for sunflower moth, but I think in 2021, we're definitely gonna get pheromone traps for that and the banded sunflower moth.
Right. Yeah, it's good. I don't know. Arthurize still not as big of a pest. So if you had just two that you wanted to trap for, it would be banded sunflower moth and sunflower head moth or sunflower moth.
Okay. Now, Janet, can you put those pheromone traps close to each other, or at least in the same field? Do they need to be apart?
Yes, they have different chemicals in the pheromones because they're species specific. So if you put them too close together, it'll confuse the moths and you'll end up not catching anything. So you need to space them at least, 25 to 50 meters or steps. I usually go, one of my steps is about 1 meter when I'm walking fast. So, and you want to put them on the windward side of the field. So the wind will blow the pheromone into the field. Of course, we get winds from different directions, but don't put them in like a shelter belt or a wooded area because it's not going to get the pheromone plume to go into the field. It's kind of protected in the shelter belt. So you want to put them kind of on the field edge and out in the open area where the wind will move the pheromone around. And that's all covered in my pheromone trapping video on YouTube, NDSU extension. So it's very important too, you don't get the oils from your skin on the pheromone lure. That will prevent the lure from working properly as well. So you need to wear, just rubber gloves to prevent from contaminating the lure.
Okay. And then this is also a question for you, Janet, and for Adam. First one, is the water rate by air making a difference? I'm guessing they're talking about the red sunflower seed weevil. Can either one of you comment on that?
Sure. I've been doing insecticide trials for over 20 years, and I've done a lot of sunflower ones for both banded and red sunflower seed weevils. And I've always found timing is the most important thing. It doesn't matter what chemical you're using, but it's timing. If you get that timing right, you will get good control. And if by air is minimum of 3, we would prefer 5 gallons per acre, but it's hard to get that.
It is. Okay. Thank you. And there is also another insect question for banded sunflower moth. If you can read it, because I know I'm gonna butcher that name. It's beyond my knowledge level. It's beyond my pay grade.
Oh, okay. What about chlorantranilipril? That's Prevathon, I believe. Yes. Yeah, I did test that for banded sunflower moth, and it was comparable to the or pyrethroids I was testing at the time, and the combo or premix organophosphate and pyrethroids. So yes, it will work. But the target for your insecticide spraying is a little different. It's more the larval stage. So you need to maybe, make sure you get it on early, but when the young are emerging from the eggs, it won't control the adult moth. It's more of a larval. It also works for sunflower head moth.
Okay. Yep. And it's not very active on seed weevils. But
yes, and I've tested it for red sunflower seed weevils and got poor control.
Okay. Thank you for answering that. And there's one more question that I think would be good for the group. Somebody has asked any agronomy tips to maximize seed weight in oils. Trig and Daryl, feel free to chime in if I'm missing something here, but some things that come to my mind. So this past summer, 2020, there was some drier areas, and there was some areas that really had some lighter lighter test weight seed. And one thing that comes to my mind is its environment, and in this case, it was lack of water. It was drought. So anytime those sunflowers get stressed like that, you're gonna lose test weight. And also keeping your plants healthy. So I've noticed in areas maybe where there's heavy disease presence, you know, I'm thinking stalk diseases like Phomopsis, I really see a reduction in test weight. So keeping your plants healthy. You know, not much we can do about water, but you know, potentially planting early to be able to maximize the moisture that's in the ground. And sometimes it can also be hybrid specific. Some hybrids naturally have a little bit lower test weight. Maybe some of ours that is meant more for dehull have a little bit lower test weight just naturally. They're a bigger seed. So that can play into some of it as well. Not sure if any of my other coworkers had anything they wanted to chime in on that.
Hey, Allison, it's Trig here. You hit the nail on the head pretty good. One other thing too is if we have growers that do desiccate, timing, as was brought up earlier, is extremely paramount on that. If we do get too early, we can also see a decrease in test weight on it, even down on some of the oils also. And as you talk, like, you know, a three-way product, you know, you go to the dehull market, we can see a little bit their test weight increase by increasing plant populations to make a smaller seed and take a little less air pocket out of our seed size to kernel weight.
Yep, absolutely. All of those things can help as well. So hopefully that answered that question. So with that, I think the survey is also going to be up on the screen after this call is completed, if anybody wanted to complete it then. But otherwise, thank you everyone for taking part in Sunflower U. We really appreciate everyone attending, the great conversations. Thank you to the presenters, and please give us some input on the survey so we know how we can do better and give you guys the information that you want. So thank you everyone. This does include our 2021 Sunflower University.